Gavin Powell was 46 and supervised night maintenance at St. Anselm Medical Center in Portland, Oregon. Most people believed his wife, Claire, had carried him for years. Gavin drove an aging Ford F-150 with a cracked mirror, drank burnt coffee from a Chevron station every morning, and wore the same faded Navy work jacket even to court. What nobody knew was that Gavin had spent 43 months quietly preparing for the exact papers Claire signed that afternoon. She slid the final document across the table, smiling. Then Gavin's phone vibrated in his hand before he even reached the courthouse doors. Claire Powell, call number 1. If you're watching from somewhere outside the U.S., comment your country and local time below. And if you enjoy stories where quiet people let the truth do the work, subscribe to the channel. Tomorrow's story gets even darker. By 6:30 every morning, Gavin Powell was already inside the lower mechanical corridor of St. Anselm Medical Center. The hospital sat on the east side of Portland, 12 floors of glass concrete and constant noise. Nurses changed shifts under fluorescent lights. Ambulances backed into emergency bays every 20 minutes. Elevators groaned. Ventilation systems rattled through old ducts hidden behind walls most people never thought about. Gavin knew every inch of the building. He knew which boiler valve stuck during heavy rain, which ICU thermostat drifted 2 degrees every winter, which elevator needed exactly 4 extra seconds before its doors closed properly. Nobody thanked him much for any of it. At 6:42 a.m., he walked through the maintenance tunnel carrying a dented metal lunchbox and a black thermos that smelled faintly of burnt Chevron coffee. His boots made dull sounds against the concrete floor. 2 younger technicians stood near Supply Room B arguing over a compressor issue. "Morning, Gav," one of them muttered without looking up. Gavin nodded once. That was usually enough. People at St. Anselm liked him, but they rarely noticed him. He was the kind of man who fixed problems before anyone realized something was broken. Quiet men often disappeared inside busy places, especially next to someone like Claire Powell. Claire moved through Portland like she belonged on magazine covers. 42 years old, blonde hair cut sharp at the shoulders, white Mercedes SUV, designer heels even during rainstorms. Her face appeared on bus stop advertisements for luxury real estate around Lake Oswego and West Lynn. Claire Powell Realty Group. Elite homes, elite results. At charity events, people shook Gavin's hand politely before turning back toward Claire. At corporate dinners, they asked him what he did, then lost interest halfway through the answer. Maintenance supervisor. Not doctor, not investor, not developer, just maintenance. Claire used to laugh about it during the early years of marriage, back when the laughter still sounded warm. Later, the laughter changed. 3 months before the divorce filing, they attended a fundraising dinner at the Sentinel Hotel downtown. Claire wore a silver dress that cost more than Gavin's truck was worth. Gavin wore his only dark suit slightly tight around the shoulders now. A real estate developer named Bryce Ellington stood beside the bar sipping bourbon. Claire touched Gavin lightly on the chest and smiled at the group. "Gavin still refuses to retire that truck," she said. The table laughed politely. Bryce smirked. Man of simple tastes. Claire swirled wine in her glass. Very simple. Gavin said nothing. He watched condensation slide down the bourbon glass in Bryce's hand. Across the room, a waiter dropped a tray. Everyone turned for a second. Claire leaned closer toward the developers and continued discussing investment properties near Bend, like Gavin was no longer part of the conversation. He stood there quietly, another 23 minutes before telling her he was heading home. She barely looked away from the group. "Keys are in my purse," she said. That was marriage near the end. Not screaming, not broken dishes, just slow erosion. Gavin drove home alone through rain, while Claire stayed downtown, drinking with people who wore watches worth $30,000. At home, he microwaved leftover chili and sat at the kitchen counter under dim lighting. That was the night he first noticed the transfer. Harbor Crest Holdings, LLC, $82,000. Wire transfer. The notification appeared briefly on the shared business tablet Claire sometimes left charging near the kitchen. Gavin stared at the screen. The transfer disappeared seconds later. Most husbands would have confronted her immediately. Gavin did not. Instead, he wrote the amount down carefully inside a small black notebook he kept in the garage. Date, time, account fragment. Nothing more. After that, he started noticing other things. FedEx envelopes arriving after midnight. Contractor invoices for renovation projects that never seemed to begin. Loan notices from Columbia Federal Bank addressed jointly to both of them, though Claire always claimed her business finances were handled. One afternoon, Gavin replaced a leaking pipe beneath the upstairs bathroom sink and found a folder shoved behind cleaning supplies. Inside were property renovation estimates totaling nearly $640,000. 3 addresses. One contractor license number repeated on every estimate. The license had expired 11 months earlier. Gavin put the folder back exactly where he found it. Then he drove to Home Depot and bought weather stripping for the garage like nothing had happened. Claire mistook silence for ignorance. A lot of people did. That winter, she became colder. Not dramatic, efficient. She stopped asking when Gavin would be home, stopped waiting for dinner, started taking business calls on the patio with the sliding door closed. Sometimes, Gavin woke at 2 a.m. and found her downstairs staring at spreadsheets on her laptop with half-empty wine glasses beside her. The glow from the screen sharpened her face into something unfamiliar. One Friday night, Claire returned home nearly an hour after midnight. Rainwater clung to her coat. Gavin sat in the garage replacing brake pads on the Ford under hanging fluorescent lights. Claire stepped inside without looking at him. "We need to talk about separating finances." Gavin wiped grease from his fingers slowly. "All right. That's it?" she asked. "What do you want me to say?" Claire crossed her arms. "You don't even ask why anymore." Gavin looked at the old brake rotor in his hands. He could hear water dripping outside through the gutters. Finally, he said, "You already decided." Claire stared at him for several seconds. Then she laughed once. Quiet, sharp. "That's the problem with you, Gavin. You just sit there. You let life happen." He slid the rotor onto the workbench carefully. "No," he said softly. "I pay attention." For a moment, something flickered across Claire's expression. Not guilt. Concern. Very brief. Then it disappeared. 2 weeks later, divorce papers arrived at St. Anselm Medical Center during Gavin's lunch break. A young receptionist carried the envelope downstairs into maintenance. Gavin?" He looked up from a cracked pump housing. The receptionist shifted awkwardly. "Courier said this was urgent." Gavin dried his hands on a rag before taking the envelope. He read the first page standing beside industrial water heaters while compressors hummed overhead. Irreconcilable differences. Asset division. Immediate separation request. Clean dissolution preferred. No alimony requested. That last line mattered. Gavin folded the papers neatly. Then he went back to repairing the pump. At 7:13 that evening, Claire finally came home. She set her purse on the kitchen island without removing her coat. "I think this is best," she said. Gavin nodded once. "You already filed?" "Yes." Outside, rain hit the windows hard enough to blur the streetlights. Claire exhaled slowly. "We can keep this simple if you cooperate." Gavin looked at her for a long moment. Not angry, not wounded, just watching. Claire mistook that silence too. She thought she was looking at a man who had already lost. What she did not understand was that Gavin Powell had started preparing long before she filed the papers. And upstairs in the garage, hidden behind old paint cans and winter tires, sat 43 months of records inside 3 sealed storage boxes. Claire still believed she controlled the ending. That belief would not survive the week. The divorce meeting took place on the 22nd floor of a glass office tower overlooking downtown Portland. Rain dragged gray streaks across the windows. The Willamette River looked cold enough to cut skin. Traffic crawled below like slow-moving metal insects. Gavin Powell arrived 11 minutes early. He wore the same dark navy suit from the fundraiser at the Sentinel Hotel. The jacket sleeves sat slightly short at the wrists now. His brown leather shoes were polished but old. He carried no briefcase, only a plain black folder tucked beneath one arm. The receptionist behind the marble desk smiled politely. "Mr. Powell, they're still setting up in Conference B." Gavin nodded once and sat near the window. Across the lobby, 2 attorneys in expensive suits argued quietly over billing hours. Somewhere deeper in the office, a printer hummed nonstop. At exactly 9 a.m., Claire stepped out of the elevator. White coat, cream-colored heels, gold earrings Gavin had bought for her 14 years earlier when overtime at St. Anselm nearly broke his back. She walked beside Tyler Voss. Tall, expensive haircut, charcoal suit that probably cost more than Gavin made in a month. Tyler carried himself like someone who enjoyed winning before games started. Claire noticed Gavin immediately. Her expression barely changed. Not sadness, not anger, only confidence. "You're early," she said. "So are you." Tyler extended a hand casually. "Tyler Voss." Gavin shook it once. Tyler's grip tightened slightly longer than necessary, a small test. Gavin released first and sat back down. Tyler glanced at the folder in Gavin's lap. "That all you brought?" Gavin looked at him calmly. "For today." Tyler smirked faintly. Claire moved toward the conference room without another word. Inside, Rebecca Sloan already waited near the end of the long walnut table. Rebecca was in her early 50s, sharp-eyed, controlled, impossible to rattle. She had spent 23 years handling corporate divorce litigation in Oregon courts. Unlike Tyler, she did not underestimate silence. She stood when Gavin entered. "You okay? I'm fine." Rebecca studied him carefully for a second before nodding toward the chair beside her. The meeting started fast. Tyler controlled the opening like a sales presentation. "Both parties have agreed a clean dissolution is preferable," he said, while sliding papers across the table. "Mrs. Powell is willing to waive spousal support entirely." Claire leaned back comfortably. Generous. That was how she wanted this to look. Tyler continued. "The Lake Oswego property transfers fully to Mr. Powell, along with all attached renovation obligations." Rebecca said nothing. Tyler pushed another document forward. "Shared business liabilities connected to Harbor Crest Holdings will also transfer." Again, silence. Claire crossed one leg over the other. From the outside, the deal looked terrible for Gavin. The Lake Oswego property carried nearly $800,000 in debt tied to unfinished renovation loans. Harbor Crest Holdings appeared unstable. Several contractor disputes were already pending. Tyler clearly believed Gavin either didn't understand the paperwork or lacked the money to fight it. Claire believed something even worse. She believed Gavin was too passive to question any of it. Tyler flipped pages confidently. No retirement contest, no future commission claims, no challenge to business ownership structure. Rebecca finally spoke, and in exchange, Claire answered herself. He keeps the house and liabilities. I keep my active real estate business and personal liquidity. Simple, clean, efficient. Tyler smiled toward Gavin like the matter was already settled. You're getting substantial property here, Mr. Powell. Gavin looked down at the paperwork. He turned pages slowly, not pretending to read, actually reading. Every line, every attachment, every loan reference number. Rain tapped softly against the windows while the room remained silent except for turning paper. Claire grew impatient first. Gavin, this doesn't need to become difficult. He looked up calmly. I didn't say it was. Tyler leaned forward. Then we're close. Rebecca watched Gavin instead of the documents. She knew that look. He had already noticed something. Gavin reached the Harbor Crest section and paused for 3 full seconds, then continued. No reaction. No visible emotion. Tyler mistook that for confusion. He slid a pen across the table. Most couples spend months destroying each other, he said casually. This is civilized. Gavin placed the pen beside the papers, but did not touch it. Claire sighed softly. You wanted peace, Gavin. This is peace. That word hung strangely in the room. Peace. As if peace meant surrender. Gavin finally spoke again. What about the storage unit inventory? Tyler blinked once. Claire frowned slightly. What inventory? The business records. Hard drives, tax files, backup devices. Claire waved dismissively. Take all of it. I don't care. Tyler shrugged. Those are mostly archived materials. Rebecca still said nothing. Gavin turned another page. And the secondary document, authority. Tyler glanced down quickly. A small clause near the back. Minor administrative language. Harmless at first glance. Claire sounded irritated now. What about it? I want full transfer authority over any records tied to liabilities assigned to me. Tyler barely looked twice. Fine. Rebecca finally moved. Add explicit language, she said calmly. Physical records, digital archives, cloud storage access, tax support documents, vendor correspondence. Tyler gave a short laugh. You planning to become an accountant, Mr. Powell? Gavin ignored him. Claire leaned back again, clearly bored. Add whatever you want. Tyler scribbled revisions quickly. He wanted the deal closed before lunch. That was the first real mistake anyone made in that room. The second mistake came 10 minutes later. Claire signed first. Smooth signature, fast, confident. One document after another slid beneath her hand. Tyler watched proudly. Rebecca passed papers toward Gavin without comment. Gavin signed slower, measured, precise. The clock on the wall clicked loudly between pages. Outside the conference room, somebody laughed near the elevators. Finally, the last document reached the center of the table. Claire signed with a small, satisfied smile. Done. Tyler gathered copies neatly. Well, he said that concludes matters unless anyone has additional concerns. Gavin looked at the final settlement packet, then at Claire. For the first time that morning, he asked a personal question. You read all of it? Claire almost smiled. Unlike you, Gavin, I pay people for that. Tyler chuckled under his breath. Rebecca didn't move. Gavin closed his folder slowly. All right. That answer unsettled Rebecca slightly, not because of what he said, because of how calm he sounded saying it. Claire stood first. Her heels clicked sharply against hardwood flooring as she gathered her purse. For a moment she looked relieved. Not emotional relief. Victorious relief. Like someone finally cutting loose dead weight. You'll be all right, she said casually while adjusting her coat. Gavin met her eyes. I know. Claire hesitated for half a second. Very small. Then turned away. Tyler opened the conference room door for her. Pleasure working this out professionally, he said to Rebecca. Rebecca offered a thin smile. I'm sure. The door closed behind Claire and Tyler. Silence filled the room immediately afterward. Rain continued sliding across the glass walls overlooking Portland. Rebecca remained seated, then slowly turned toward Gavin. Well? Gavin stared at the signed agreement for several seconds. She transferred everything tied to Harbor Crest. Yes. She also transferred the authorization rights. Rebecca nodded once, and Gavin opened his black folder for the first time that morning. Inside sat a small stack of printed bank routing reports. Color-coded tabs, dates, transaction chains. Rebecca's expression changed instantly. You already traced them? Part of them. How long? Gavin answered without emotion. Almost 4 years. Rebecca leaned back slowly in her chair. For the first time since taking his case, she looked genuinely stunned. Outside, thunder rolled somewhere beyond the river. Gavin placed one finger against a highlighted wire transfer. $82,000. Harbor Crest Holdings, LLC. Then another, and another. Rebecca looked toward the closed conference room door where Claire had disappeared, smiling less than 60 seconds earlier. She thinks she dumped the damage onto you, Rebecca said quietly. Gavin closed the folder. She did something else too. Rebecca frowned slightly. What Gavin stood. She just gave me access. Portland traffic crawled through sheets of cold afternoon rain while Gavin Powell drove north on Interstate 5 in silence. Claire had called twice already. He did not answer. The phone vibrated against the center console, stopped, then vibrated again 30 seconds later. Claire. Gavin glanced at the screen once before muting the device completely. His old Ford F-150 rattled slightly whenever water collected beneath the tires. The windshield wipers dragged unevenly across the glass with a tired squeak every few seconds. Downtown Portland disappeared behind him. For the first time in 14 years, Gavin was driving home without needing to explain where he had been. The thought didn't make him happy, just quieter. At 12:48 p.m., he pulled into the driveway of the Lake Oswego house. The property sat at the end of a curved private lane lined with cedar trees and expensive landscaping. Claire had paid a designer nearly $40,000 to install 3 summers earlier. The house looked beautiful from the outside. That was always Claire's specialty. Surface, presentation, angles. Inside, the silence felt different now. Not tense, vacant. The living room still smelled faintly of Claire's perfume and the vanilla candles she ordered in bulk from some boutique company in Seattle. A white ceramic coffee mug sat near the sink, exactly where she left it that morning. Half an inch of cold espresso remained inside. Gavin stood there for a moment, listening to the refrigerator hum. Then he walked upstairs. The master bedroom looked partially emptied already. Claire had taken most of her designer clothes, jewelry cases, and cosmetics during the previous week. while Gavin worked overtime shifts at St. Anselm. But she had left all the business material behind, exactly like she promised. Gavin entered the home office at the far end of the hallway. Floor-to-ceiling shelves lined one wall. Decorative real estate awards covered another. Top Luxury Sales Pacific Northwest, Elite Producer, Platinum Performance Club. Claire liked visible success. The storage keys sat inside a crystal bowl on the desk. Gavin picked them up carefully. Then he noticed something else. A blinking light beneath the monitor. One external hard drive still connected. Claire missed it. Or forgot it. Either possibility mattered. Gavin sat slowly in the leather office chair she used for client Zoom calls. The room still carried traces of expensive perfume and printer toner. He powered on the monitor. The system loaded quickly. Password protected. Gavin entered 6 numbers without hesitation. Claire's birthday. The desktop opened immediately. That almost made him smile. Not because she trusted him, because she never believed he paid attention. Folders appeared across the screen. Client archives, escrow records, renovation bids, vendor invoices, and one folder named HCH Internal, Harbor Crest Holdings. Gavin plugged in a flash drive from his jacket pocket and began copying files silently. The rain intensified outside. Somewhere downstairs his phone buzzed again, then stopped. A few minutes later, Rebecca Sloan called instead. Gavin answered immediately. "You're home?" "Yes." "Do not alter anything," Rebecca said. "No deleted files, no changes, no forwarding unless we document it first." "I know. You'd be amazed how many people panic after gaining access." Gavin clicked through another folder. Expense reports, transfer summaries, PDF invoices. "I'm not panicking." Rebecca paused briefly. "No," she admitted. "You're not?" Gavin opened a subfolder labeled Renovation Support Q3. Inside sat dozens of contractor invoices, many duplicated. Same formatting, same invoice numbers, different addresses. His eyes narrowed slightly. "Rebecca, what I found repeats. How many?" "Still checking." Gavin opened another file. Then another. One contractor appeared repeatedly across multiple luxury renovation projects. Northridge Construction Services. The company license number looked familiar. Too familiar. Gavin stood abruptly. 3 years earlier, Claire claimed Northridge renovated a property near Beaverton. Gavin remembered because she complained for weeks about unreliable labor costs. But Gavin had looked up the contractor license afterward, out of curiosity. Expired. He remembered because the expiration date landed one day after his birthday. Most people forgot details quickly. Gavin rarely did. He copied the files carefully. Then another document caught his attention. Loan Authorization Addendum. His name appeared near the bottom. Signature included. Gavin stared at it silently. Not his handwriting. Not even a... Rebecca heard the silence through the phone. "What is it?" Gavin spoke evenly. She forged one. Rebecca's tone sharpened instantly. "Send me the document. Right now." He exported the file and encrypted the transfer before emailing it directly. A minute later, Rebecca opened it on her side, then exhaled slowly. "That's not just civil exposure anymore." Gavin leaned back in Claire's chair. Outside the office window, rainwater slid down cedar branches in silver streams. She used my name on loan paperwork, he said quietly. Yes, more than once. Rebecca went silent. That silence told Gavin enough. She had already suspected something worse. What are you thinking? He asked. I'm thinking, Rebecca replied carefully, that Claire may have assumed you'd never actually review any of this. Gavin looked around the office. Designer furniture, luxury staging books, perfectly framed success. And underneath it all sat carelessness. Not sloppy carelessness, arrogant carelessness. Claire had built her entire strategy around one belief. Gavin would never fight back because Gavin never reacted. At 2:17 p.m., Gavin drove to the storage facility in Tigard. Rain hammered the roof of the truck the entire way. Unit C-114 sat near the back fence behind rows of concrete garages and rusted security lights. Gavin unlocked the unit slowly. Inside sat stacked banker boxes labeled with black marker. 2019 taxes, closing docs, archive media. Most people would have seen junk. Gavin saw timelines. He carried the first two boxes into the truck bed carefully, then a third. Near the back wall sat a gray fireproof lockbox Claire probably forgot existed. Dust coated the top. Gavin stared at it for several seconds. He knew the box. He bought it 12 years earlier after a pipe burst in their first house. Claire never used it, which meant she probably forgot the combination too. Gavin entered 6 numbers. The lock clicked open immediately. Inside sat passports, old property deeds, USB drives, and a sealed envelope. Gavin opened the envelope carefully. 3 pages. Notarized copies. His eyes stopped on the second page. Wire authorization records. Harbor Crest. Holdings, LLC. Signed under his name again. But this time something else appeared beneath the signature block. A routing destination. Cayman National Trust. Gavin stared at the page without moving. Rain echoed through the metal storage roof overhead. Rebecca answered on the second ring. What happened? Gavin looked at the routing numbers again. It's offshore. Silence. Longer this time. Then Rebecca spoke very quietly. Bring everything to my office. Do not leave those documents anywhere. I'm looking at least 3 forged authorizations. Probably more. Gavin slid the papers back into the envelope. For the first time all day, something shifted inside him. Not anger, disappointment. Heavy, familiar, final. Because the signatures meant Claire hadn't just hidden money. She had prepared to bury him underneath whatever eventually surfaced. Gavin locked the storage unit again and stood in the rain beside the truck. Cold water soaked through his work jacket. His phone vibrated once more. Claire calling. He finally answered. For 2 seconds, neither of them spoke. Then Claire exhaled sharply. Why aren't you answering me? Gavin leaned one hand against the wet truck door. What do you need? I need to know what Rebecca Sloan is doing. Gavin watched rainwater stream across the asphalt. You signed the papers, Claire. That's not an answer. No, he said calmly. It's the important part. Silence. Then her voice changed slightly, smaller now. What did you find? Gavin looked toward the locked storage unit. Rows of sealed boxes sat hidden behind concrete walls less than 20 feet away. Years of records. Years of patience. Years Claire never noticed. Finally, he answered softly, I think you already know. And for the first time since filing for divorce, Claire Powell hung up first. Portland traffic crawled through sheets of cold afternoon rain. while Gavin Powell drove north on Interstate 5 in silence. Claire had called twice already. He did not answer. The phone vibrated against the center console, stopped, then vibrated again 30 seconds later. Claire. Gavin glanced at the screen once before muting the device completely. His old Ford F-150 rattled slightly whenever water collected beneath the tires. The windshield wipers dragged unevenly across the glass with a tired squeak every few seconds. Downtown Portland disappeared behind him. For the first time in 14 years, Gavin was driving home without needing to explain where he had been. The thought didn't make him happy, just quieter. At 12:48 p.m., he pulled into the driveway of the Lake Oswego house. The property sat at the end of a curved private lane lined with cedar trees and expensive landscaping. Claire had paid a designer nearly $40,000 to install 3 summers earlier. The house looked beautiful from the outside. That was always Claire's specialty. Surface, presentation, angles. Inside, the silence felt different now. Not tense, vacant. The living room still smelled faintly of Claire's perfume and the vanilla candles she ordered in bulk from some boutique company in Seattle. A white ceramic coffee mug sat near the sink, exactly where she left it that morning. Half an inch of cold espresso remained inside. Gavin stood there for a moment, listening to the refrigerator hum. Then he walked upstairs. The master bedroom looked partially emptied already. Claire had taken most of her designer clothes, jewelry cases, and cosmetics during the previous week while Gavin worked overtime shifts at St. Anselm. But she had left all the business material behind, exactly like she promised. Gavin entered the home office at the far end of the hallway. Floor-to-ceiling shelves lined one wall. Decorative real estate awards covered another. Top luxury sales Pacific Northwest. Elite producer. Platinum Performance Club. Claire liked visible success. The storage keys sat inside a crystal bowl on the desk. Gavin picked them up carefully. Then he noticed something else. A blinking light beneath the monitor. One external hard drive still connected. Claire missed it, or forgot it. Either possibility mattered. Gavin sat slowly in the leather office chair she used for client Zoom calls. The room still carried traces of expensive perfume and printer toner. He powered on the monitor. The system loaded quickly. Password protected. Gavin entered 6 numbers without hesitation. Claire's birthday. The desktop opened immediately. That almost made him smile. Not because she trusted him, because she never believed he paid attention. Folders appeared across the screen. Client archives, escrow records, renovation bids, vendor invoices, and one folder named HCH Internal, Harbor Crest Holdings. Gavin plugged in a flash drive from his jacket pocket and began copying files silently. The rain intensified outside. Somewhere downstairs, his phone buzzed again, then stopped. A few minutes later, Rebecca Sloan called instead. Gavin answered immediately. "You're home?" "Yes." "Do not alter anything," Rebecca said. "No deleted files, no changes, no forwarding unless we document it first." "I know. You'd be amazed how many people panic after gaining access." Gavin clicked through another folder. Expense reports, transfer summaries, PDF invoices. "I'm not panicking." Rebecca paused briefly. "No," she admitted. "You're not." Gavin opened a subfolder labeled Renovation Support Q3. Inside sat dozens of contractor invoices, many duplicated, same formatting, same invoice numbers. different addresses. His eyes narrowed slightly. Rebecca, what I found repeats. How many still checking? Gavin opened another file, then another. One contractor appeared repeatedly across multiple luxury renovation projects. Northridge Construction Services. The company license number looked familiar. Too familiar. Gavin stood abruptly. 3 years earlier, Claire claimed Northridge renovated a property near Beaverton. Gavin remembered because she complained for weeks about unreliable labor costs. But Gavin had looked up a contractor license afterward, out of curiosity. Expired. He remembered because the expiration date landed one day after his birthday. Most people forgot details quickly. Gavin rarely did. He copied the files carefully. Then another document caught his attention. Loan authorization addendum. His name appeared near the bottom, signature included. Gavin stared at it silently, not his handwriting, not even close. Rebecca heard the silence through the phone. What is it? Gavin spoke evenly. She forged one. Rebecca's tone sharpened instantly. Send me the document. Right now. He exported the file and encrypted the transfer before emailing it directly. A minute later, Rebecca opened it on her side, then exhaled slowly. That's not just civil exposure anymore. Gavin leaned back in Claire's chair. Outside the office window, rainwater slid down cedar branches in silver streams. She used my name on loan paperwork, he said quietly. Yes. More than once. Rebecca went silent. That silence told Gavin enough. She had already suspected something worse. What are you thinking? He asked. I'm thinking, Rebecca replied carefully, that Claire may have assumed you'd never actually review any of this. Gavin looked around the office. Designer furniture. Luxury staging books. Perfectly framed success. And underneath it all sat carelessness. Not sloppy carelessness. Arrogant carelessness. Claire had built her entire strategy around one belief: Gavin would never fight back because Gavin never reacted. At 2:17 p.m., Gavin drove to the storage facility in Tigard. Rain hammered the roof of the truck the entire way. Unit C-114 sat near the back fence behind rows of concrete garages and rusted security lights. Gavin unlocked the unit slowly. Inside sat stacked banker boxes labeled with black marker. 2019 taxes, closing docs, archive media. Most people would have seen junk. Gavin saw timelines. He carried the first 2 boxes into the truck bed carefully, then a third. Near the back wall sat a gray fireproof lockbox Claire probably forgot existed. Dust coated the top. Gavin stared at it for several seconds. He knew the box. He bought it 12 years earlier after a pipe burst in their first house. Claire never used it, which meant she probably forgot the combination too. Gavin entered 6 numbers. The lock clicked open immediately. Inside sat passports, old property deeds, USB drives, and a sealed envelope. Gavin opened the envelope carefully. 3 pages. Notarized copies. His eyes stopped on the second page. Wire authorization records. Harbor Crest Holdings, LLC. Signed under his name again. But this time something else appeared beneath the signature block. A routing destination. Cayman National Trust. Gavin stared at the page without moving. Rain echoed through the metal storage roof overhead. Rebecca answered on the second ring. What happened? Gavin looked at the routing numbers again. It's offshore. Silence. Longer this time. Then Rebecca spoke very quietly. Bring everything to my office. Do not leave those documents anywhere. I'm looking at least 3 forged authorizations, probably more. Gavin slid the papers back into the envelope. For the first time all day, something shifted inside him. Not anger, disappointment, heavy, familiar, final. Because the signatures meant Claire hadn't just hidden money. She had prepared to bury him underneath whatever eventually surfaced. Gavin locked the storage unit again and stood in the rain beside the truck. Cold water soaked through his work jacket. His phone vibrated once more. Claire calling. He finally answered. For 2 seconds, neither of them spoke. Then Claire exhaled sharply. Why aren't you answering me? Gavin leaned one hand against the wet truck door. What do you need? I need to know what Rebecca Sloan is doing. Gavin watched rainwater stream across the asphalt. You signed the papers, Claire. That's not an answer. No, he said calmly. It's the important part. Silence. Then her voice changed slightly, smaller now. What did you find? Gavin looked toward the locked storage unit. Rows of sealed boxes sat hidden behind concrete walls less than 20 feet away. Years of records, years of patience, years Claire never noticed. Finally, he answered softly, I think you already know. And for the first time since filing for divorce, Claire Powell hung up first. Rebecca Sloan's office stayed lit until nearly midnight. Most of the other law firms inside the downtown Portland building had already gone dark. Empty hallways reflected soft yellow light across polished floors. Somewhere far below, traffic hissed through rain-soaked streets. Inside conference room 3, banker boxes covered almost every surface. Gavin Powell sat at the end of the table in silence, while Rebecca sorted documents with surgical precision. Wire transfer records formed one stack. Contractor invoices formed another. Loan applications sat separately beneath colored tabs. Rebecca removed her reading glasses and rubbed one temple slowly. How long have you been collecting this? Gavin checked the timestamp on one invoice. 43 months. Rebecca gave a short nod. Not impressed. Concerned. You documented all of it yourself. Most. You hired anyone, no. Rebecca leaned back in her chair and studied him carefully again. She had represented executives, politicians, athletes, and wealthy business owners during ugly divorces. Most reacted emotionally the second betrayal appeared. They yelled, threatened, destroyed evidence. Gavin did none of that. He approached the entire thing like a maintenance problem inside a hospital wall. Find the leak. Trace the pressure. Shut the system down carefully. At 11:18 p.m., Rebecca opened another folder labeled Renovation Expense Support. Inside sat 17 invoices connected to Harbor Crest Holdings, LLC. All tied to luxury renovation projects Claire publicly claimed had increased her real estate portfolio value. Rebecca scanned 3 pages before stopping abruptly. These invoice numbers repeat. I know. Same amount too, mostly. Rebecca flipped through another packet faster now. 32,000. 32,000 again. 47,000. 47,000 again. Different addresses, same formatting, same routing instructions. Rebecca looked up sharply. She duplicated vendor billing. Gavin nodded once. The rain outside intensified against the office windows. Rebecca stood and walked toward a whiteboard near the wall. She began writing dates quickly. Transfers connected themselves into patterns. Harbor Crest Holdings appeared repeatedly between accounts. Some money moved into renovation loans. Some disappeared through contractor payments. Some routed offshore. Rebecca circled 3 transactions hard enough the marker squeaked. These matter. Gavin looked up from the documents. Why those? Because they happened within 72 hours of federal-backed loan approvals. Silence settled heavily across the room. Rebecca capped the marker slowly. That changes exposure dramatically. Gavin stared toward the rain beyond the glass. Federal fraud. Potentially. She didn't soften the answer. She respected him too much for that now. At midnight, Rebecca ordered takeout from a 24-hour diner 2 blocks away. Gavin barely touched his sandwich. Instead, he kept organizing records chronologically. Rebecca noticed the detail immediately. Every page already labeled. Every date cross-referenced. Every suspicious transaction connected to handwritten notes from Gavin's black notebook. You built a timeline. Yes. For 4 years. Gavin finally looked at her directly. I knew if I confronted her too early, everything would disappear. Rebecca held his gaze for a second, then nodded once. That answer explained almost everything. Patience like that did not come naturally to most people. It came from years of being underestimated. At 12:46 a.m., Rebecca inserted one of the recovered flash drives into an encrypted laptop. Folders loaded slowly, emails, financial exports, scanned signatures, vendor contracts, then a folder titled Temp Files. Rebecca clicked it open. 23 PDFs appeared instantly. Gavin moved beside her chair. The first file displayed a property refinance authorization, signed under Gavin Powell's name. Fake. The second showed a contractor payment release. Fake again. The third froze the room completely. Columbia Federal Bank. Commercial renovation extension approval. Authorized borrower Gavin Powell. Loan amount $1,480,000. Rebecca's expression hardened. She used your identity to secure commercial extensions. Gavin remained still. How bad? Rebecca scrolled through the approval details carefully. Bad enough that if this collapsed publicly before documentation existed, you could have been attached to all of it. Outside, thunder rolled across downtown Portland. Gavin leaned both hands against the conference table. For several seconds, nobody spoke. Then Rebecca asked quietly, "Did you ever suspect she planned to pin this on you?" Eventually, Gavin answered honestly. Yes. Rebecca looked surprised for the first time all night. You already believe that? She stopped hiding certain things. What things? Gavin stared at the fake signature on screen. She started leaving paperwork where I could see it. Rebecca frowned slightly, meaning she wanted me connected to it. That realization settled heavily between them. Not emotional betrayal. Strategic betrayal. Claire had not simply hidden money. She had built layers. Debt. Liability. Forged authorizations. Offshore movement. And throughout all of it, Gavin's name appeared often enough to create damage if the structure collapsed suddenly. Rebecca closed the laptop halfway. You understand something important here. What? You're lucky you paid attention. Gavin almost answered immediately, then stopped. Because luck had very little to do with it. Attention had become survival years ago. Back when Claire first started changing. Back when expensive dinners replaced quiet evenings at home. Back when she stopped asking about his day and started measuring people by visible success. At 1:14 a.m., Gavin finally drove home. The city looked hollow at that hour. Wet sidewalks, closed bars, streetlight tees reflecting gold across puddles. His truck heater clicked unevenly while he crossed the Hawthorne Bridge. The phone vibrated again beside him. Claire. Call number 6. He ignored it. Then came a voicemail notification immediately afterward. Gavin listened through the truck speakers while driving. Gavin, listen to me. Claire sounded controlled at first. Too controlled. This has gotten out of proportion. Rebecca Sloan is escalating things unnecessarily. Rain crackled softly across the windshield. You don't understand some of those documents. A pause. Then a different tone entered her voice. Careful now. Testing. If you start turning things over to investigators without context, you could hurt yourself too. Gavin's eyes stayed fixed on the road. There are liabilities attached to your name. Another pause. You need to call me back before this gets worse. The message ended. Gavin deleted nothing. He saved the voicemail instead. At home, the Lake Oswego house felt colder than before. The emptiness had changed shape overnight. Claire's absence no longer felt temporary. It felt evacuated. Gavin walked upstairs to the office again. Moonlight filtered faintly through rain clouds outside. He sat in Claire's chair and opened the black notebook he had kept hidden in the garage for nearly 4 years. Page after page. Dates, amounts, names, addresses, observations, not emotional entries, not revenge fantasies, evidence. Near the middle of the notebook sat one sentence written almost 2 years earlier. She thinks silence means blindness. Gavin stared at the words for a long time. Then his phone rang again. Claire. Call number 7. This time he answered. Her breathing sounded uneven immediately. Where are you at home? Are you with Rebecca? No, Mom. Claire exhaled sharply. Good. Then listen carefully. Gavin waited. You cannot let lawyers turn this into something bigger. You already did that. That's not fair. No, Gavin said calmly. Forgery isn't fair. Silence exploded across the line. For the first time since the divorce began, Claire sounded genuinely afraid. What exactly did you find? Gavin looked around the office she once treated like a command center. Awards still lined the walls. Luxury listing photos still framed in silver. Everything polished. Everything false underneath. Finally, he answered quietly. I stopped counting. Claire said nothing after that. But Gavin heard it anyway. The small crack beginning to spread beneath her confidence. And somewhere deep inside, the documents stacked across Rebecca Sloan's office downtown, the truth was already moving faster than Claire realized. By Thursday morning, Claire Powell had called 7 times before Gavin finished his first coffee. The 8th call came while he stood knee-deep behind an access panel inside the pediatric wing at St. Anselm Medical Center. Warm air rushed through exposed ventilation ducts above him. Somewhere nearby, a child cried briefly before nurses soothed the sound away. Hospital life moved continuously around him, unaware that federal-level financial fraud was quietly unfolding beneath Gavin Powell's name. His phone buzzed again inside his jacket pocket. Claire! Gavin ignored it and tightened another mounting bracket. Pressure looks stable now, said one of the younger techs beside him. Gavin checked the gauge. Give it another minute. The younger technician, Luis Ramirez, glanced toward Gavin's vibrating pocket and smirked. Your phone's been blowing up all morning. Gavin wiped dust from his hands with a rag. Probably spam. Luis laughed once. Spam sounds emotional these days. Gavin didn't answer. At 8:13 a.m., he finally stepped into the maintenance break room. The television mounted near the vending machines played a muted morning news segment about rising mortgage rates in Oregon. Rain hammered the windows again. Portland looked permanently wet this time of year. Gavin opened his thermos and took a slow sip of burnt coffee just as his phone rang again. This time it wasn't Claire. Unknown number. Area code 503. He answered quietly. Powell. A calm male voice responded immediately. Mr. Powell, this is Miles Benton with Columbia Federal Bank's Compliance Division. Gavin leaned back slightly in the plastic chair. Yes. I apologize for contacting you at work. We need clarification regarding several commercial renovation authorizations connected to Harbor Crest Holdings, LLC. Gavin looked through the break room glass toward the hallway outside. Nurses passed carrying charts. An elderly janitor pushed a mop bucket slowly across polished tile. Ordinary morning. Completely disconnected from the conversation now happening through Gavin's phone. What kind of clarification, he asked. A brief pause. Your signatures appear on multiple commercial extension documents tied to approximately $3.8 million in renovation-backed lending. Gavin's face remained still, but his grip tightened slightly around the thermos. I didn't authorize those. We understand that may be your position, not accusation, procedure. Miles Benton sounded careful. Professional. We've also identified inconsistencies involving vendor disbursements and routing destinations offshore. Gavin already knew. Miles continued, at this stage, Mr. Powell, you are not listed as the primary subject of inquiry. Not yet. The wording mattered. Gavin stared at rainwater sliding down the hospital parking structure outside. What do you need from me? Documentation cooperation. That's all. For now. Miles paused again before lowering his voice slightly. Off the record, someone moved money very aggressively through those accounts. Gavin said nothing. People don't usually transfer liabilities that fast unless they expect exposure, Miles added. Gavin thought about Claire signing the divorce papers with that satisfied smile. Clean dissolution preferred, no alimony requested. Take the house, take the debt, take Harbor Crest. She thought she was burying him alive beneath collapsing structures. Instead, she handed him the records proving who built them. When do you need the documents? Gavin asked. As soon as possible. I'll have my attorney contact you. Rebecca Sloan. Gavin paused. You know her? Everybody in compliance knows Rebecca Sloan. The line disconnected shortly afterward. Gavin sat alone another minute without moving. Then his phone vibrated again. Claire. Call number 9. This time he answered immediately. Claire spoke before he could. Why is Columbia Federal contacting me? Gavin's expression didn't change. You tell me. I'm serious. So am I. Her breathing sounded sharper now, less controlled than before. You talked to someone? Yes. What did you say? The truth. Claire went silent. Hospital announcements echoed faintly overhead while Gavin waited. Finally, she spoke again, slower this time. Gavin, this can still stay private. Private. Interesting word. Not innocent. Not mistaken. Private. Gavin looked down at grease stains on his work gloves. You forged signatures. That's not what happened. What happened then? Claire exhaled hard into the phone. You never handled business operations. Some paperwork had to move quickly. That's your explanation. It was procedural. Gavin almost laughed. Not because it was funny, because Claire still believed presentation could overpower facts. The same instinct that made her successful in real estate was now becoming dangerous. Sell confidence first, details later. Except investigators cared about details. And Gavin had spent 4 years collecting them. "You need to stop talking to Rebecca," Sloan, Claire said suddenly. "No. She's turning this adversarial. You already did that when you used my name." Claire's tone hardened immediately. "Careful, Gavin." That word changed the air between them. Careful. A warning now. Not a request. Gavin stood slowly from the break room table. What happens next isn't my decision anymore. Then he ended the call. At 10:22 a.m., he met Rebecca Sloan outside the federal courthouse downtown during his lunch break. Rebecca stood beneath a black umbrella reviewing printed records while traffic sprayed rainwater across nearby curbs. "You were right," she said without greeting him. "About the lender inquiry expanded overnight." She handed him several copied pages. Gavin scanned the documents quickly. Commercial review escalation, fraud assessment referral, internal compliance notification. Rebecca watched his expression carefully. Still calm, still controlled. "You understand what this means?" she asked. "They're preparing formal investigation." "Yes." Gavin folded the papers neatly. "What about liability?" Rebecca looked him directly in the eye. "Right now, your documentation is the only reason you're not standing inside this inquiry instead of outside it." The words landed heavily. Not dramatic, just true. Rainwater dripped steadily from the courthouse steps behind them. Rebecca lowered her voice slightly. "There's another issue." Gavin waited. "The Lake Oswego property has a concealed lien attached through a renovation guarantee." He frowned slightly. "That wasn't disclosed." "No, it wasn't." How much? Rebecca hesitated briefly. $680,000. For a moment, even Gavin felt the weight of that number. Claire had transferred the property deliberately. Not because she no longer wanted it, because she knew something tied to it was already unstable. "She knew," Gavin said quietly. "Yes." Traffic lights reflected red across wet pavement between them. Rebecca adjusted the folder beneath her arm. "I've already filed emergency preservation notices. If she starts moving assets now, it'll look catastrophic." "She's already panicking." Rebecca studied him. How bad? Gavin checked his call log silently. 11 missed calls. 3 voicemails. "She's losing control of the timeline." Rebecca nodded once. "That's when people make mistakes." At 2:47 p.m., Gavin returned to St. Anselm. He spent the afternoon repairing a failed backup generator behind the surgical wing. Cold rain soaked through his work jacket while he tightened fuel line couplings beneath harsh utility lights. Nobody there knew federal investigators might soon freeze everything tied to his wife's business network. Nobody knew his name sat inside forged loan documents worth millions. And Gavin preferred it that way. Around 5:30 p.m., he climbed back into the truck after finishing the repair. His phone displayed 17 missed calls, 4 voicemails, 2 messages from unknown numbers, 1 text from Claire. "Please call me before this gets worse." Gavin stared at the message for several seconds. Then another notification appeared immediately beneath it. New email. United States Financial Crimes Review Division. He opened it slowly. Formal cooperation request. Attached meeting notice. Friday morning, downtown Portland Federal Building. Gavin leaned back against the driver's seat while rain struck the windshield hard enough to blur the hospital lights outside. For the first time since Claire filed for divorce, the situation no longer belonged only to lawyers. Now the system itself had entered the room. And systems, Gavin knew better than most people, moved slowly, right before pressure exploded. Friday morning arrived gray and cold over Portland. Gavin Powell left the Lake Oswego house before sunrise. The streets were nearly empty except for delivery trucks and early commuters crossing bridges through low fog, drifting above the Willamette River. His phone vibrated twice during the drive downtown. Claire, then Claire again. He ignored both. At 7:14 a.m., Gavin parked outside a small coffee shop near the Pearl District called Alder Street Roasters. The place sat between a furniture showroom and an old brick warehouse converted into luxury lofts years earlier. Rebecca Sloan had arranged the meeting late the previous night. "Her name is Dana Holloway," Rebecca said over the phone, "former bookkeeping contractor for Harbor Crest Holdings. She contacted you." "No. She contacted Columbia Federal first. Then she asked for legal representation. That detail mattered. People only searched for attorneys before speaking when they were scared or guilty." Inside the coffee shop, warm air smelled like espresso and wet wool coats. Jazz played quietly overhead. Most customers stared into laptops while rain streaked the windows beside them. Dana Holloway sat alone in the far corner booth. Mid-30s, brown coat, dark circles beneath her eyes. A silver laptop bag rested beside her feet. She noticed Gavin immediately when he entered. Not with surprise, recognition. Like she had imagined him differently before finally seeing him in person. Rebecca stood beside the booth, already reviewing documents. "Gavin," she said quietly, "sit." Dana looked nervous enough to spill her coffee when Gavin took the seat across from her. For several seconds, nobody spoke. Then Dana finally exhaled. "You really didn't know everything." Gavin rested both hands around a paper coffee cup. "Not everything." Dana nodded slowly. "I kept wondering. How someone could sign all those documents without asking questions." Gavin looked at her calmly. "I ask questions." Dana glanced toward Rebecca. "She said you documented things." "I did." Another silence. Rain tapped softly against the windows. Finally, Dana reached into her laptop bag and removed a small black flash drive. She placed it carefully on the table between them. Rebecca immediately slid it toward herself. "What's on it?" she asked. Dana swallowed once before answering. "Backups. Backups of what QuickBooks exports. Vendor files. Internal payment logs." Rebecca's eyes narrowed slightly. "All from Harbor Crest." Dana nodded. "And email archives." Gavin watched Dana closely now. Not emotionally, carefully. People revealed things through details when frightened. Dana kept twisting a silver ring around her finger while speaking. She avoided eye contact every time Claire's name came up. That usually meant fear, not loyalty. "She started using fake vendors 2 years ago," Dana said quietly. Rebecca opened a notebook immediately. "How many? I don't know. Exactly. Estimate." Dana looked down at the coffee table. "Maybe 9. Maybe more." Gavin spoke for the first time in nearly 2 minutes. "Northridge Construction." Dana's eyes snapped upward instantly. "Yes." That reaction told him enough already. It wasn't real, Dana admitted. At least not after 2020. Rebecca wrote quickly. "What about the invoices?" Dana laughed nervously once. "She duplicated them." "We know." Dana looked surprised by that. "You already found repeats?" "Yes." Dana leaned back slowly like the room temperature suddenly dropped. She thought nobody would ever check the numbers. Gavin almost responded to that, but stopped, because he understood something Dana did not. Claire never believed Gavin incapable of seeing details. She believed him incapable of acting on them. That difference mattered. Rebecca continued calmly. Explain how Gavin's signatures entered the files. Dana hesitated, long enough for Rebecca to notice immediately. You either answer now, Rebecca said quietly, or federal investigators ask you later. Dana looked at Gavin, then away again. Finally, she whispered. Claire scanned his signatures from old refinance paperwork. The words landed heavily against the table. Even after discovering forged documents, hearing the process described aloud changed something. Calculated, deliberate, organized. How often, Rebecca asked. Whenever banks require joint authorization. Gavin's expression stayed neutral, but his fingers tightened slightly around the coffee cup. Dana noticed. She always said you wouldn't look closely anyway. Rebecca stopped writing for a second, then resumed. Did Claire ever discuss liability exposure? Dana nodded immediately, all the time. What specifically? She was scared lenders would audit renovation draws. Why? Dana looked toward the rain-streaked windows. Because some projects didn't exist. The jazz music overhead suddenly felt too soft for the conversation happening beneath it. Rebecca leaned forward slightly. How much money are we talking about? Dana answered without hesitation this time. At least $3 million. Silence. Even inside a crowded coffee shop, the number seemed to flatten the air around them. Gavin stared down into his untouched coffee. $3 million. Moved through fake contractors, false renovations, forged signatures. And somehow Claire still believed she could control the situation with enough confidence and pressure. She panicked. After the divorce papers, Dana continued quietly. Rebecca looked up. What changed? She realized Gavin got the records. There it was. The real fear, not exposure itself, access. Claire had spent years controlling information flow. The moment Gavin legally obtained the files, the structure became unstable. Rebecca folded her hands. Did Claire move additional assets recently? Dana nodded again. Last month. Where I don't know all the destinations. But one transfer went through Cayman roading. Gavin exchanged a brief look with Rebecca. Confirmation. Dana reached into her bag again. This time she removed printed email chains. I copied these before leaving. Rebecca scanned the first page quickly, then the second, then stopped entirely on the third. Her expression hardened instantly. What? Gavin asked. Rebecca slid the page toward him. The email came from Claire to Dana 6 months earlier. If anything ever surfaced, Gavin signed the approvals. Keep the vendor summaries consistent. Gavin read the sentence twice, not because he misunderstood it, because clarity sometimes hit harder than suspicion. Dana spoke quietly. She started preparing fallback narratives last winter. Narratives, Rebecca repeated coldly. Dana nodded weakly. She said if lenders ever questioned the renovations, she'd claim Gavin handled operational approvals. Gavin placed the email back on the table carefully. No visible anger, no outburst, but something settled deeper inside him now. Finality. Claire had not only betrayed him financially, she had planned the escape route. Rebecca turned toward Dana again. Why come forward now? Dana looked exhausted suddenly. Because she started deleting things. What things? Vendor records, internal chats, archived approvals. When, after the divorce filing, Rebecca's eyes sharpened instantly. That's obstruction territory. Dana nodded miserably. She told me to wipe backup folders Wednesday night, but you copied them instead. Yes. Gavin finally asked the question that mattered most. Why Dana met his eyes for the first time. Because you never looked like the guilty one. Simple answer. Honest answer. And somehow heavier because of that. At 8:42 a.m., Rebecca collected the flash drive and documents into a sealed evidence envelope. We're done for now, she said. Dana looked relieved and terrified at the same time. Before leaving, she stopped beside Gavin's chair. There's something else, she said quietly. Gavin waited. Dana glanced around the coffee shop before lowering her voice. Claire still doesn't understand what you actually own. Gavin frowned slightly. What does that mean? She used to complain about some industrial property your father left you. The Salem land. Gavin said nothing. Dana continued. She called it worthless dirt. Rebecca looked toward Gavin immediately, but Gavin stayed still. She tried convincing accountants to treat it as dead equity during restructuring, Dana added. Did she? Dana shook her head. No buyers. No interest. At least that's what she believed. Gavin stared through the coffee shop windows into the rainy Portland street outside. Cars moved slowly through morning traffic. Pedestrians hurried beneath umbrellas. Ordinary city life continuing while invisible structures collapsed underneath someone else's confidence. His phone vibrated again. Claire! Call number 14. Gavin silenced it without looking away from the window. Then Dana said the sentence that stayed with him long after she left. She's afraid now, Gavin. Not guilty, not sorry. Afraid. And fear made people dangerous when they realized the quiet man they underestimated had already seen everything. By Friday afternoon, Claire Powell had called 17 times before noon. Gavin Powell counted them without meaning to. The numbers appeared automatically now whenever his phone vibrated against metal surfaces at work. Call 17 came while he stood on a ladder, replacing emergency lighting inside the West Surgical Corridor at St. Anselm Medical Center. White fluorescent light flooded the hallway. Nurses moved quickly between operating rooms. A surgeon in dark blue scrubs brushed past Gavin, carrying a tablet without even noticing him. That part felt familiar. Invisible men learned how to disappear in plain sight. His phone buzzed again in his jacket pocket. Claire. Gavin let it ring. Below him, Luis Ramirez steadied the ladder with one hand. You sure your wife's not reporting a kidnapping? Luis joked. Ex-wife Gavin corrected calmly. Luis whistled softly. That bad Gavin replaced the light cover carefully. Worse. Luis laughed, expecting humor. Gavin didn't explain. At 12:16 p.m., Gavin stepped outside behind the maintenance loading dock for air. Cold rain drifted sideways across the alley between hospital buildings. Delivery trucks idled beside dumpsters, while steam rose from rooftop vents overhead. His phone vibrated again immediately, then again, before the first ring finished. Claire. 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 Gavin muted the device and stared across the wet parking structure. A black Mercedes SUV sat near the far exit gate. Not Claire's. Different plates. Still, he noticed it immediately. Years of maintenance work trained his mind to recognize details other people filtered out automatically. Patterns, changes, pressure. His phone rang again. This time it was Rebecca Sloan. You need to see this, she said without greeting him. What happened? Columbia Federal escalated internal review to full fraud containment. Gavin leaned against the concrete wall beneath dripping pipes. That fast. They found additional transfers this morning. How much? Rebecca paused briefly. Another 900,000 moved through Harbor Crest 3 weeks ago. Rainwater ran steadily through nearby drains. And Claire, Gavin asked, she's trying to regain access to frozen accounts. Can she? Noma Rebecca sounded almost impressed by the speed of the collapse now. Compliance shut down 3 business channels already. Gavin closed his eyes briefly. Not from stress. Calculation. Claire's entire public image depended on movement. Transactions. Listings. Constant visibility. Luxury real estate operated on momentum and confidence. Frozen accounts destroyed both. Rebecca continued. There's something else. Gavin waited. She contacted Tyler Voss repeatedly this morning. That's not surprising. He stopped returning calls. That part mattered. Lawyers only disappeared when situations crossed from difficult into dangerous. Gavin looked back toward the hospital entrance where nurses hurried through rain beneath umbrellas. She's losing people, he said quietly. Yes. Rebecca's voice lowered slightly. And desperate clients make mistakes. At 1:04 p.m., Gavin drove downtown during lunch to meet Miles Benton at Columbia Federal's compliance office. The building overlooked Pioneer Courthouse Square. Gray clouds hung low over Portland, while rain polished every sidewalk into reflective silver. Miles Benton greeted him in a secured conference room on the 7th floor. Mid-40s, wire-rimmed glasses, dark suit without a wrinkle anywhere. The kind of man who organized his desk drawers alphabetically. He shook Gavin's hand firmly before sitting across from him. Mr. Powell, thank you for cooperating. Gavin nodded once. Miles opened a thick folder immediately. Inside sat copies of loan authorizations, transfer records, and vendor disbursement timelines. We've completed preliminary signature comparison analysis, Miles said, and the majority of disputed signatures do not appear consistent with your known documents. Gavin already expected that. Still hearing it formally mattered. Miles slid another paper across the table. This is more important. Gavin scanned the page. Transaction escalation summary. 3 highlighted transfers routed through Harbor Crest Holdings. Final destinations obscured through layered vendor accounts. Miles tapped one line specifically. Your name appears attached to authorization metadata here. Gavin looked up calmly. I didn't authorize any of it. We believe you. Not reassurance. Conclusion. Miles folded his hands carefully. Mr. Powell, off the record, your documentation may have prevented this entire structure from landing on top of you. Gavin thought about the black notebook hidden in his garage for 4 years. Dates, amounts, observations, tiny details no one else cared about. Claire thought I didn't pay attention, he said quietly. Miles gave a small nod. That assumption may end her career. Silence settled between them for several seconds. Then Miles spoke again. There's another issue developing. What issue? A reporter contacted the bank this morning. Gavin's expression stayed neutral. Claire? We assume so. Miles opened another file. She's attempting to position herself as the victim of a hostile divorce dispute. Gavin almost smiled at that. Almost. Will it work? Miles looked genuinely confused by the question. Not against audited records. That answer mattered more than reassurance ever could. Systems had rules. And systems, unlike emotions, did not care who smiled better, in public. At 3:27 p.m., Gavin returned to St. Anselm. The hospital basement smelled faintly of bleach and overheated machinery. He spent nearly an hour repairing a damaged water circulation valve near radiology, while his phone continued vibrating against a nearby toolbox. Call 18. Call 19. Call 20. Finally, during a short break, Gavin checked the voicemails. The first sounded angry. Gavin, stop hiding behind lawyers. The second sounded controlled again. You're making this bigger than it needs to be. The third changed completely. Fear. Real fear this time. Please call me back. Gavin stared at the screen quietly. No shouting, no threats. Just pressure collapsing into panic one layer at a time. Then another notification appeared. Text message from an unknown number. Claire's friend, Monica Harlan. You need to speak with Claire. People are saying terrible things. Gavin locked the phone again without replying. People? Interesting word. For years, Claire built her world around people. Clients, investors, social circles, appearances. Now those same circles were beginning to smell weakness, and wealthy social circles abandon weakness faster than almost anything else. At 5:41 p.m., Gavin exited the hospital through the employee parking structure. Rain echoed softly through concrete levels while fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. Halfway toward his truck, he noticed someone standing near the elevator columns. Claire. Camel-colored coat, hair damp from rain, arms folded tightly across her chest. For the first time in years, she looked tired. Not physically, structurally, like the pressure inside her life had started cracking support beams. Gavin stopped several feet away. Neither moved. You blocked me, Claire said finally. No. You stopped answering. Yes. Rainwater dripped steadily somewhere deeper in the garage. Claire stepped closer. Banks are freezing accounts. Gavin said nothing. You spoke to investigators. Yes. Her jaw tightened visibly. You could have warned me. Gavin looked at her quietly for several seconds, then answered with complete calm. You forged my signatures. The words hit harder in person. Claire looked away immediately. Not guilty, calculating, still searching for angles. You don't understand how complicated business structures work. I understand enough. No, you don't. Her voice sharpened suddenly. You think paperwork tells the whole story? Gavin glanced upward. Security cameras sat mounted above both garage exits, recording everything. He noticed because he always noticed. Claire continued speaking quickly now. Those loans supported multiple projects. Investors were involved. Timelines mattered. You used my name. You benefited too. That sentence finally changed something in Gavin's eyes. Not rage, distance, cold distance. Because now he understood Claire still believed outcomes justified methods. Still believed success erased process. You should leave, Gavin said quietly. Claire stared at him. Are you serious? Yes. You're just going to stand there while everything collapses. Gavin unlocked his truck remotely. The headlights flashed once through the dim garage. Claire's voice dropped lower. Almost desperate now. Gavin, you don't understand what you have. He looked at her one final time. Maybe years ago he would have mistaken fear for vulnerability. Now he recognized it more accurately. Exposure. And exposure frightened people who spent their entire lives building controlled images. Before Gavin climbed into the truck, Claire grabbed his sleeve lightly. Not affection, panic. Please. Gavin looked down at her hand, then back at her face. "Truth survives paperwork," he said softly. Claire released him immediately. And for the first time since this began, Gavin saw something inside her confidence finally fracture completely. The property sat 30 miles outside Salem, Oregon. Most people would have driven past it without slowing down. A fenced stretch of industrial land near old rail lines and abandoned warehouse lots. Gravel access roads, rusted utility poles, wet grass bending beneath constant wind. Rolling through the valley, Claire Powell used to call it Gavin's dirt patch, sometimes the inheritance mistake. Once during an argument 3 years earlier, she laughed and said, "Your father left you 17 useless acres and somehow you're sentimental about it." Gavin never argued back. He simply kept paying the property taxes every year, quietly. On Saturday morning, rain finally stopped for the first time in days. Gray clouds still covered most of the sky, but pale sunlight broke through over the Willamette Valley. While Gavin drove south in the old Ford F-150, his phone remained silent for nearly 40 minutes. Then it buzzed again. "Claire, call 26. He ignored it. Rebecca Sloan sat in the passenger seat, reviewing printed documents from a leather folder balanced against her knee. "You never told me about the Salem property," she said. "You never asked." "That's fair." Rebecca looked out the windshield toward the highway ahead. Dana Holloway mentioned Claire tried minimizing its value during restructuring. She hated the place. "Why keep it?" Vita rested one hand loosely against the steering wheel. "My father bought it in 1987. "That's not what I asked." Gavin remained silent long enough for Rebecca to understand the answer anyway. Some things people kept because selling them felt too close to erasing someone. At 9:12 a.m., they turned onto a gravel service road leading toward the property. A black SUV already waited near the entrance gate. Rebecca glanced at Gavin. "You expecting company?" "No." A man stepped out as the truck approached. Mid-50s, dark raincoat, professional posture. Another woman followed carrying a tablet and rolled blueprints beneath one arm. Rebecca immediately lowered her voice. "That's not random." Gavin parked beside the gate and stepped out into cold morning wind. The man approached first. "Mr. Gavin Powell, no." He extended a hand. "Daniel Mercer, Northwest Grid Development." Gavin shook once. The woman introduced herself next. "Elaine Foster, Site Acquisition." Rebecca quietly watched the entire exchange. Daniel glanced toward the industrial land beyond the fence. "Appreciate you meeting us on short notice." Gavin frowned slightly. "You contacted Rebecca yesterday." Daniel smiled politely. "We've been trying to contact ownership for months." "Ownership?" "Singular. Not shared anymore." Claire signed away all property claims during the divorce settlement. Rebecca understood the significance immediately, too. Daniel continued. "We're expanding regional battery storage infrastructure for Pacific Northwest energy stabilization." Elaine unrolled a large site map across the hood of Gavin's truck. Colored markings covered the acreage, utility corridors, rail access, substation proximity, environmental notes. Rebecca's expression sharpened as she studied the documents. "This property connects directly to the Salem industrial grid expansion route," she said quietly. Daniel nodded. "Exactly." Gavin looked across the fenced land again. For years, he only saw what remained of his father, an old welding business, empty storage lots, broken concrete. He never looked at it like investors did, position, access, potential. Daniel pointed toward the northern edge of the map. The rail access alone significantly increases commercial viability. Elaine added carefully, "We're prepared to make a formal acquisition offer immediately." Rebecca folded her arms. How immediate! Daniel looked directly at Gavin. "Pending environmental verification, we're prepared to open negotiations above 7 million. Silence. Even the wind seemed to stop briefly around them. Rebecca slowly removed her glasses. Gavin stared at the map without reacting outwardly. 7 million. Claire laughed at this land for years, mocked it at dinners, complained about taxes tied to worthless dirt. And 3 days earlier, she signed away every possible future claim connected to it. Daniel misread Gavin's silence. "I understand this may sound abrupt." "It does," Gavin admitted. "We've been tracking regional expansion planning for nearly 18 months. Rebecca looked up sharply. 18? Elaine nodded. "We attempted contact through Harbor Crest Holdings previously." Gavin turned toward her immediately. What Elaine checked notes on the tablet. There were preliminary outreach emails sent last year regarding potential industrial acquisition interest. Rebecca's eyes narrowed. To Claire Powell is another silence, this one colder, because suddenly several missing pieces aligned perfectly. Claire knew there was interest, maybe not exact numbers, maybe not the full valuation, but enough to understand the property was becoming valuable, and she still signed it away. Why? Gavin's mind moved carefully through possibilities, then landed on the most likely answer. Claire assumed the collapsing fraud investigation would bury the land beneath liens and financial exposure anyway. She transferred everything toxic to Gavin, believing the property would become another dead asset attached to debt. Instead, the structure shifted faster than she expected. Rebecca spoke carefully now. "You're saying Claire was informed about acquisition interest before the divorce settlement?" Elaine hesitated slightly. "We contacted Harbor Crest administrative channels twice." "Do you still have records?" Yes. Rebecca almost smiled. Tiny. Sharp. "That'll be useful." At 10:03 a.m., Gavin walked alone along the fence line while Rebecca continued discussing acquisition terms with Daniel and Elaine near the trucks. Cold wind pushed across the open acreage. Weeds bent beneath old chain-link fencing. A faded sign near the back lot still carried his father's old company name, Powell Industrial Fabrication. Nearly invisible now beneath rust and weather. Gavin stopped beside it quietly. He remembered standing there at 14 years old while his father welded steel beams under floodlights during winter rainstorms. Hard work. Simple rules. Don't sign what you don't understand. Don't borrow what you can't repay. And always keep records. His father repeated that last one constantly. Keep records. Funny how small lessons survived longer than expensive appearances. His phone buzzed again. "Claire." Call 31. This time a voicemail arrived immediately afterward. Gavin listened while staring across the property. "Gavin. Where are you?" Claire sounded exhausted now. Not polished, not composed. Raw edges had entered her voice. "I heard you met with Columbia Federal again." Rainwater dripped softly from overhead utility lines. "You need to stop talking to people without me present." A shaky breath. "Please." Then another pause. Longer. "What did Dana tell you?" That question mattered more than anything else in the message. Not, "Are you okay?" Not, "Can we talk?" Only damage assessment, information control. Gavin saved the voicemail without replying. When he returned toward the trucks, Rebecca was already waiting beside the driver's side door. They brought preliminary valuation estimates, she said quietly. How high higher than 7? Gavin looked toward Daniel Mercer, speaking with Elaine near the gate. Claire knew Rebecca nodded once. I think she suspected enough to panic, and still transferred it. She probably believed federal exposure would freeze everything attached to you before any acquisition closed. Gavin rested one arm against the truck bed. For the first time in days, Rebecca saw something shift slightly inside him. Not satisfaction. Recognition. Claire's entire strategy depended on speed. Move money fast. Move liability faster. Control the narrative before facts stabilized. But systems moved slower than panic, and real land, didn't care about narratives. It simply waited until someone finally understood its value. At 11:26 a.m., Gavin prepared to leave. Before getting into the truck, Daniel Mercer handed him a sealed envelope. Formal intent. Proposal, he said. Gavin accepted it quietly. We'd appreciate discretion until negotiations finalize. Rebecca almost answered for him. You'll have it. As Gavin climbed into the driver's seat, his phone vibrated again. Claire. Call 34. He stared at the screen while the Salem property stretched endlessly beyond the windshield. Then another call appeared instantly beneath it. Unknown number. Portland? Area code. Rebecca noticed immediately. You going to answer? Gavin looked at the screen for several seconds, then finally accepted the unknown call. A nervous male voice spoke immediately. Mr. Powell, this is Kevin Laird from Oregon Ledger. Reporter. Right on schedule. We're preparing a story involving Claire Powell and Harbor Crest Holdings. Gavin said nothing. We were told you may have comments regarding financial retaliation claims. Retaliation. There it was. Claire had started building her public defense already, and Gavin suddenly understood something dangerous. She wasn't trying to save the marriage anymore. She was trying to survive the collapse. By Saturday evening, Portland smelled like wet pavement and cold river air. Traffic lights reflected across slick streets, while downtown restaurants filled with people pretending the weather didn't exist. Inside St. Anselm Medical Center, the night shift had already started. Gavin Powell walked through the employee parking garage carrying a worn black tool bag over one shoulder. Long shift, 2 emergency repairs, 3 hours of sleep the night before, and 38 missed calls from Claire Powell. The number no longer surprised him. Pressure changed people quickly when control disappeared. As Gavin crossed level 3 of the parking structure, he noticed Claire immediately. She stood beside a concrete support pillar near his truck. Camel coat, dark jeans, hair pulled back roughly like she no longer cared how it looked. That alone felt strange. Claire always cared how things looked. For years, presentation had been armor. Now, exhaustion showed openly beneath her eyes. Gavin slowed, but did not stop walking. Claire stepped forward quickly. We need to talk. Her voice echoed sharply through the mostly empty garage. Gavin set the tool bag into the truck bed calmly. We already did. No, she snapped. You listened. That's different. Rainwater dripped somewhere deeper in the structure. The fluorescent lights overhead flickered faintly every few seconds. Gavin glanced upward automatically. Electrical ballast issue. Probably overdue maintenance. Claire noticed the glance and laughed once in disbelief. Seriously, you're checking lights right now? Yes. She stared at him. For a second, genuine frustration broke through the fear. How are you? This calm, Gavin looked back at her. I had 4 years to get used to it. That answer hit harder than anger would have. Claire crossed her arms tightly. You think this makes you smarter than me? No. Then stop acting like you've already won. Won. Interesting word. Gavin studied her face carefully. Claire still viewed everything as competition. Even now, even standing inside a collapsing financial disaster. You're not listening, Gavin said quietly. To what? This stopped being about us days ago. Claire looked away briefly. Not denial. Calculation again. Still searching for exits. You spoke to reporters, Gavin continued. Her eyes snapped back toward him immediately. So what if I did? You're building a story. I'm protecting myself. The honesty almost surprised him. Not because she admitted it, because she admitted it so fast. Claire stepped closer. You think those investigators care about you? She asked sharply. You think banks just decided you're innocent because you organized paperwork? Gavin said nothing. That's not how this works. No, he replied calmly. It's exactly how this works. The silence afterwards stretched long enough for tires squealing somewhere below to echo upward through the garage. Claire rubbed one hand across her forehead. For the first time since the divorce started, she looked overwhelmed instead of strategic. I didn't plan for this to happen, she muttered. Gavin watched her quietly, not comforting, not attacking, just observing. What part? He asked. Claire laughed bitterly. All of it, then immediately corrected herself. No, that's not true. She paced 2 steps away before turning back. I planned for the loans to stabilize after the market recovered. You forged signatures. I needed approvals fast. You used my name. You benefited from the income too. That sentence hardened the air between them again, because Claire still measured morality through outcomes. Money came in, lifestyle improved. Therefore, methods became acceptable. Gavin understood her clearly now, maybe clearer than ever before. What did you think would happen? He asked quietly. Claire stared at him. You'd never look closely. There it was, finally spoken aloud. Not ignorance, not stupidity, assumption. She believed silence meant disengagement, that quiet men drifted through life half awake while louder people controlled outcomes. Claire moved closer again. You were supposed to sign things and stay out of the way. Gavin's expression barely changed, but something inside him settled permanently hearing that. Not heartbreak, confirmation. Above them, a security camera rotated slowly across the garage entrance. Claire followed his gaze upward. You think cameras matter right now? Why? Because people panic when they realize they're being recorded. Claire stared at him for a second, then suddenly understood. Every word, every movement, documented. Just like the paperwork, just like the transfers, just like the calls. She stepped backward instinctively. Too late. You planned this? She whispered. Gavin shook his head once. No. You collected everything. Yes. You waited. Yes. Claire's voice cracked slightly now. That's planning. Gavin looked toward the rain beyond the open edge of the parking structure. No, he said softly. That's surviving. The word landed differently than anything else he had said. Because for the first time, Claire heard what he actually experienced during those years. Not passivity, endurance. Watching someone slowly convert trust into liability while pretending marriage still existed. Claire's phone rang suddenly inside her coat pocket. She ignored it. Then another call came immediately afterward, and another. Gavin noticed her hands shaking slightly while silencing the device. "Who is it?" he asked. "Attorneys?" Plural. Not Tyler Voss anymore. Multiple attorneys. Which meant Tyler either withdrew or advised her to seek criminal counsel already. Claire leaned against the concrete pillar heavily. "I can still fix parts of this." Gavin remained silent. "You don't understand how many people are involved." That sentence mattered because it implied networks beyond Claire herself. Investors, developers, financial channels, maybe worse. "Then they should start hiring lawyers too," Gavin replied. Claire closed her eyes briefly. "You really want to destroy me?" Destroy? Another interesting word. Because Gavin never chased destruction. He chased accuracy. Very different things. "I wanted you to stop using my name," he said quietly. Rain blew lightly through the garage opening, now carrying null mist across the concrete floor. Claire looked smaller suddenly. Not physically, structurally, like parts of her confidence were collapsing inward faster than she could reinforce them. "You could still help me," she whispered. "How?" "You could say you approved operational decisions." Gavin almost looked surprised, not because she asked, because she still thought there was room for negotiation. "You're asking me to lie to federal investigators. I'm asking you to protect both of us." "No," Gavin said calmly. "You're asking me to protect you." Claire's jaw tightened. For several seconds, she said nothing. Then anger finally broke through the fear again. "You think you're some kind of victim?" Gavin met her eyes evenly. "I think you signed my name on documents worth millions." Claire took another step forward. "You had no problem living in the house those loans paid for. There it is." "What?" "The justification." Claire laughed sharply. "Oh, spare me." "No," Gavin replied quietly. "You already spent years doing that for yourself." The words hit harder because he said them without raising his voice. No performance, no rage. Only truth stripped clean. Claire looked genuinely shaken now, not by the accusations, by the calmness behind them. People expected anger during collapse. Calm felt more dangerous. Her phone rang again. This time she answered instantly. "What?" A male voice shouted loudly enough for Gavin to hear fragments. "Freeze order!" Reporter contacted compliance. "Don't speak publicly." Claire turned away quickly. "No, listen to me." The call disconnected abruptly. She stared at the screen in disbelief. Then another notification appeared immediately afterward. Email. Another. And another. Even from several feet away, Gavin recognized the expression crossing her face. Systems closing, doors locking, momentum reversing. Claire looked up slowly. Fear sat openly in her eyes now. Real fear. Not social embarrassment. Not divorce fear. Structural fear. "What did Rebecca Sloan send out?" she asked quietly. Gavin picked up his tool bag again. "Documentation." Claire grabbed his sleeve before he could turn away. "Gavin, please." He looked down at her hand, then at the security camera rotating slowly above them. Finally, he answered softly, "Use the truth carefully, Claire." And this time when he walked away, she didn't follow. because somewhere between the forged signatures and the frozen accounts, Claire Powell had finally realized the quiet man she underestimated was no longer reacting to events. He was standing still while the truth moved around her like closing walls. By Sunday morning, the story had already started moving through Portland. Quietly at first, a compliance inquiry here, a frozen commercial account there, a canceled luxury listing whispered about inside real estate offices downtown. People who spent years smiling beside Claire Powell at charity galas suddenly stopped returning calls. That part happened fast. Fear traveled quicker than loyalty in wealthy circles. At 8:06 a.m., Gavin Powell stood alone inside the maintenance workshop at St. Anselm Medical Center, repairing a damaged electrical relay panel while rain tapped softly against the basement windows. The hospital remained steady around him. Machines hummed. Ventilation systems cycled. Patients arrived. People recovered. The ordinary rhythm comforted him. Real systems behaved predictably when maintained properly. Human beings did not. His phone buzzed once against the metal workbench. Unknown number. Portland area code. Gavin wiped grease from his hands and answered. This is Gavin Powell. Mr. Powell, Kevin Laird from Oregon Ledger. The reporter again. Gavin stayed quiet. Kevin continued carefully. I'm calling because Miss Claire Powell provided statements suggesting you may be retaliating during an active divorce dispute. There it was. Not accusation directly. Framing. Claire had started shaping public language already. Retaliation sounded emotional, messy, personal, much safer than fraud. What exactly did she say? Gavin asked. Kevin hesitated. She claims financial records are being selectively misrepresented through your attorney. Gavin almost smiled at the wording. Selective misrepresentation. Interesting phrase from someone who duplicated invoices and forged signatures. Kevin lowered his voice slightly. Off the record, something about her version isn't holding together. Why? Because your attorney sent documentation. Rebecca Sloan moved fast, faster than Claire expected. Kevin continued. Bank timelines don't match her statements. Neither do vendor records. Gavin listened without interrupting. Also, Kevin added, Columbia Federal declined comment, but confirmed compliance escalation exists. That mattered. Once institutions stopped denying investigations, collapse usually accelerated. What are you writing? Gavin asked. A verification piece for now. Not a profile, no. Kevin paused. Honestly, we thought this was another ugly divorce story. And now silence briefly filled the line. Now it looks financial. After the call ended, Gavin returned to the relay panel without hurry. He adjusted wiring carefully beneath fluorescent lights while his mind sorted details the same way he sorted mechanical systems. Pressure source, failure points, containment. Claire's strategy was obvious now. If she could muddy public perception early enough, maybe she could recast herself as a successful businesswoman destroyed by a resentful ex-husband. The problem was documentation. Documentation ruined emotional narratives, especially when banks became involved. At 10:32 a.m., Rebecca Sloan arrived at the hospital cafeteria carrying 2 thick folders and black coffee. She sat across from Gavin while doctors and nurses moved through crowded lunch lines nearby. Tyler Voss officially withdrew representation. Gavin nodded once. Expected. He did it fast. That means exposure widened. Rebecca slid a folder across the table. Inside sat printed copies of media inquiry requests. 3 local outlets already contacted her office. Oregon Ledger, Portland Business Review, Northwest Financial Watch. She's talking to too many people, Rebecca said quietly. Gavin looked through the pages calmly. She's scared. Yes, Rebecca agreed. And scared people over-explain. That was already happening. Claire's statements shifted repeatedly between administrative misunderstanding, divorce retaliation, temporary accounting, confusion, and unauthorized access to business systems. Too many explanations, too quickly. Rebecca opened another folder. This matters more. Inside sat formal records from Columbia Federal Compliance investigators. Highlighted sections covered multiple pages. Duplicated contractor invoices, forged authorization signatures, vendor routing anomalies. Rebecca tapped one paragraph specifically. They confirmed Harbor Crest attempted account access after freeze notification. Claire. Most likely. Can they prove it? Probably. Gavin leaned back slightly in the cafeteria chair. Nearby, a nurse laughed loudly at something beside the coffee station. Silverware clattered against trays. Television monitors played muted weather forecasts. Ordinary life continuing around catastrophic mistakes. Rebecca studied him carefully. You still all right? Yes. Really? Gavin thought about the question honestly, then answered the only truthful way possible. I stopped being surprised days ago. Rebecca nodded slowly. That answer carried more weight than emotional breakdown ever could. At 1:18 p.m., Gavin returned home after his shift ended. The Lake Oswego house sat silent beneath low gray skies. Fallen cedar branches littered parts of the driveway from overnight wind. Inside, the emptiness felt colder now. Claire's absence had become structural, permanent. Gavin placed his keys on the kitchen counter and immediately noticed something strange. One cabinet door slightly open. Not enough to alarm most people. Enough to alarm him. He walked through the house slowly. Living room untouched. Office untouched. Bedroom untouched. Then he reached the garage. One storage shelf had shifted slightly. Not obvious, barely visible, but Gavin noticed because he built the shelf himself 13 years earlier. He crouched carefully beside the lower cabinet. The black notebook still sat hidden behind old paint cans. Untouched, but someone searched. His phone vibrated instantly. Claire. Call 42. Gavin answered immediately this time. Were you in the house? Silence. Then Claire replied sharply, I still have access. You searched the garage. No. You moved the shelf. Another silence. This one longer. Then Claire exhaled hard into the phone. You're keeping records against me. I kept records for myself. That's not the same thing. No, Gavin agreed quietly. It really isn't. Claire's voice sounded exhausted now. Raw. I came to get documents. You mean evidence, business files. You already deleted what you could. Silence again. Then suddenly, what does Rebecca Sloan actually have? There it was again. Always the same question beneath every conversation. Not, how do we fix this? Not what happens to us. Only, what do you know? Gavin leaned against the garage workbench, slowly. She has enough. For what? The truth. Claire laughed bitterly. You sound so self-righteous now. No, he replied calmly. I sound organized. The line went quiet. Then Claire spoke again, softer this time. You really hate me now. Gavin looked around the garage. Old tools, work lights, winter tires stacked neatly against the wall. The black notebook hidden only feet away. No, he said honestly. I just finally understand you. That answer hurt her more than anger would have, because hatred still implied emotional attachment. Understanding felt colder. Final. Claire's breathing turned uneven. They're going to destroy everything I built. No, Gavin replied quietly. The records are doing that. He ended the call before she answered. At 4:57 p.m., another email arrived from Oregon Ledger. Kevin Laird requested confirmation regarding forged authorization documents tied to Harbor Crest Holdings. Rebecca advised one response only. No comment pending formal proceedings. Simple, clean, accurate. That evening, Gavin sat alone in the kitchen reviewing more files while rain slid down the dark windows outside. One document after another confirmed the same pattern. Duplicated vendors, circular transfers, false renovation draws. Every layer built on the assumption nobody quiet enough would ever challenge it properly. Then at 8:14 p.m., Rebecca called again. They issued subpoenas. Gavin looked up immediately. For who? Harbor Crest Holdings, Columbia Federal Internal Records, vendor communications. The room seemed to grow quieter around him. When Monday morning, Gavin stared toward the empty dining room where Claire once hosted wealthy clients beneath expensive pendant lights. It's moving fast. Yes, Rebecca hesitated briefly, then added, and Claire just contacted a television station. Gavin closed the folder slowly, trying harder now. That meant panic was worsening. What's her angle, claiming emotional abuse and financial retaliation? The words hung heavily in the kitchen air. Not because Gavin feared them, because he finally understood Claire completely now. When systems closed in, she defaulted to narrative control. Appearances, sympathy, reframing. But cameras captured parking garage confrontations. Banks captured transaction histories. Emails captured intent. And documents, thousands of documents, captured everything. Claire spent years assuming nobody would ever organize against her. Outside rain struck the windows harder. Inside, Gavin's phone vibrated again. Claire. Call 47. He let it ring until voicemail answered. Then he listened carefully. Not to her words, to the fear underneath them. Because for the first time in years, Claire Powell no longer sounded like someone controlling the story. She sounded like someone trying to outrun it. Room 604 sat near the far end of the Federal Building in downtown Portland. Gray walls, long conference table, filtered fluorescent light that flattened every color in the room. The kind of place designed to remove comfort from conversations. By Monday morning, the rain had finally stopped, but the city still looked soaked. Water clung to sidewalks and reflected cold light from the overcast sky outside. Gavin Powell arrived at 8:11 a.m. carrying a plain black folder beneath one arm. No expensive briefcase, no dramatic entrance, just the same faded navy work jacket folded neatly over his shoulder, because he came directly from an overnight shift at St. Anselm Medical Center. Rebecca Sloan waited beside the elevator lobby, reviewing printed notes. You sleep at all? She asked quietly. Enough. That probably meant 2 hours. Rebecca studied him carefully while they walked toward room 604. You understand today matters? Yes. Claire hired criminal counsel over the weekend. Gavin nodded once. Expected. Rebecca gave him a sideways look. You say that a lot. People behave predictably under pressure. That answer almost sounded mechanical, but Rebecca understood what he meant. Systems failed in patterns. So did human beings. Inside room 604, federal investigators already sat around the conference table reviewing files. Miles Benton, from Columbia Federal, stood near the far wall beside two attorneys Gavin had never seen before. At the head of the table sat Judge Helen Mercer, late 60s, silver hair, sharp posture, calm eyes that missed very little. She glanced up briefly when Gavin entered. Mr. Powell, Your Honor. No unnecessary conversation followed. That mattered too. People who understood serious proceedings rarely performed inside them. Claire arrived 6 minutes later. Black coat, hair perfectly styled again, professional makeup carefully reapplied. She looked controlled from a distance, but Gavin noticed the details immediately. Slight swelling beneath her eyes, tighter jaw, movements too precise. The kind of control people used when panic already lived underneath the surface. Beside her walked a new attorney, Benjamin Keene, Portland white-collar defense specialist. Expensive suit, expensive watch, expression carefully neutral. Tyler Voss was gone completely now. Claire saw Gavin immediately but looked away just as fast. Not confidence anymore, avoidance. The deposition began at 8:37 a.m. Judge Mercer adjusted her glasses while reviewing the opening documentation. This proceeding concerns financial authorization disputes tied to Harbor Crest Holdings, LLC, and related commercial lending structures. Everything sounded colder when formalized. Cleaner. No emotional language. Just facts entering systems. Benjamin Keene spoke first. My client maintains that operational confusion during marital dissolution created documentation inconsistencies. Rebecca Sloan almost smiled. Inconsistencies, another soft word trying to cover forged signatures and offshore transfers. Miles Benton handed several folders toward Judge Mercer. Compliance review identified repeated authorization irregularities across 38 commercial transactions. Judge Mercer looked toward Gavin. Mr. Powell, did you authorize these transactions? Number simple, direct, no speech attached. Benjamin Keene immediately leaned forward. Mr. Powell, is it true you benefited financially from several properties connected to Harbor Crest Holdings? Gavin looked at him calmly. I lived in one house, funded partially through these loans, yes. Benjamin nodded like he had established something important. And during your marriage, you raised no objections regarding your wife's business success. Gavin remained still. Success and fraud are different things. Silence. Even Judge Mercer paused briefly at that answer. Benjamin adjusted papers quickly. You claim ignorance regarding operational management. No. That caught him slightly off balance. You didn't know about the transactions. I knew some things didn't make sense. Yet you stayed silent for years. Yes. Benjamin seized on that immediately. So you knowingly benefited while waiting until divorce proceedings to object. Rebecca stood instantly. Mischaracterization. Sustained. Judge Mercer replied calmly. Benjamin sat back again, irritated now. Gavin watched him carefully. Defense attorneys, under pressure, often pushed too fast early. Same pattern as overloaded machinery. Too much force created structural mistakes. Miles Benton activated a presentation monitor near the wall. One document appeared on screen. Loan authorization, Harbor Crest Holdings. Forged signature under Gavin's name. Miles spoke evenly. Signature analysis confirms multiple inconsistencies with verified Powell documentation. Another document appeared, then another, then another. 38 transactions. Repeated vendor routing, duplicated invoice numbers, layered transfers. The room slowly changed shape as evidence accumulated visually across the screen. Not dramatic, heavy, like concrete settling. Benjamin Keene interrupted sharply. These are still allegations pending full forensic review. Miles nodded once. Correct. Then displayed the offshore routing records. Cayman National Trust. Multiple transfers. Judge Mercer's expression hardened slightly for the first time all morning. Rebecca Sloan opened another evidence packet. Additionally, we submitted internal email correspondence recovered from Harbor Crest backup systems. Benjamin immediately objected. Authentication incomplete. Rebecca didn't even look at him. Metadata verified Friday evening. Then she handed copies toward Judge Mercer. Claire stared at the documents before they even reached the table. Gavin noticed something important then. Fear shifted visibly across her face before the pages arrived, meaning she already knew which emails Rebecca recovered. Judge Mercer adjusted her glasses and read silently for several moments. Then aloud, if anything ever surfaces, Gavin signed the approvals. The room became very quiet. No one moved. No one needed to. Because suddenly the structure underneath Claire's narrative cracked open publicly. Benjamin Keene recovered first. That statement lacks contextual framing. Rebecca finally turned toward him fully. Forgery tends to damage context. Judge Mercer lifted one hand slightly. Enough. Silence returned immediately. Claire sat motionless beside her attorney. Gavin looked at her only once during the entire proceeding, long enough to notice something strange. She looked tired. Not manipulative, not theatrical, just exhausted, like maintaining the collapse required more energy than she had left. At 10:14 a.m., investigators shifted toward Harbor Crest vendor structures. Dana Holloway's backup files appeared next. QuickBooks exports, deleted vendor archives, internal accounting notes. Miles Benton highlighted a specific vendor trail. Northridge Construction Services, repeated invoices, inactive license, false renovation support. Benjamin Keene's composure started slipping visibly now. He interrupted twice, objected 3 times, requested procedural pauses. None changed the records already sitting in front of everyone. Judge Mercer finally looked directly toward Claire. Mrs. Powell, were you aware these vendor authorizations contained duplicated invoice structures? Benjamin answered instantly. My client declined speculative interpretation pending full accounting review. Judge Mercer didn't respond immediately. Instead, she turned toward Gavin again. Mr. Powell. Yes, Your Honor. When did you begin documenting irregularities? Gavin answered truthfully. About 4 years ago. Why? The room waited. Gavin looked briefly toward the monitor, still displaying forged signatures beside Harbor Crest transfer timelines, then answered quietly, because things stopped adding up. Judge Mercer studied him for several seconds, not suspiciously, carefully. People in federal proceedings learn to recognize performance quickly, and Gavin wasn't performing. He sounded exactly like a maintenance supervisor explaining a failing system. Pressure changed, noise increased, patterns broke. So he documented everything. At 11:02 a.m., the final evidence packet entered review. Harbor Crest access logs, deleted archive attempts, account freeze notifications, and one detail that changed the room entirely. Post-freeze login attempts originating from Claire's credentials. Benjamin Keene closed his eyes briefly when Miles Benton displayed the timestamps. Friday night. Saturday morning. Repeated access attempts after formal preservation orders. Judge Mercer's voice cooled noticeably. Mrs. Powell was notified of evidence preservation status. Before these actions, Rebecca answered immediately. Yes. Another silence. This one dangerous, because obstruction concerns changed legal gravity fast. Claire finally spoke for the first time in nearly 40 minutes. Quietly, barely above a whisper. I was trying to understand what they had. Nobody answered her, because intent no longer mattered as much as records. At 11:26 a.m., Judge Mercer closed the folder in front of her carefully. This inquiry will expand. No raised voice, no theatrical declaration, just fact. She looked toward the federal investigators. I want full review authority granted immediately regarding Harbor Crest Holdings and associated vendor structures. Then toward Rebecca. Maintain evidence preservation. Finally toward Gavin. Mr. Powell, continue cooperating through counsel. Yes, Your Honor. The proceeding ended quietly after that. No dramatic confrontation, no explosion, just systems moving forward once enough documentation existed. As people began standing from the conference table, Claire remained seated several seconds longer than everyone else. Gavin noticed, because he always noticed. Then finally, she looked up at him. Not angry anymore, not superior, only cornered. And for the first time since signing the divorce papers, Claire Powell looked like someone beginning to understand that truth did not move emotionally. It moved methodically, like machinery. And once enough weight shifted behind it, nothing standing in its path stayed upright for long. By Friday night, Claire Powell had called 74 times. Gavin knew because the number sat at the top of his phone screen while he stood alone on the back patio of the Lake Oswego house, watching rain drift across the dark yard. 74 calls in 7 days. The first came outside the courthouse. The last came 3 minutes ago. The progression between them told an entire story by itself. Confidence, pressure, anger, negotiation, fear, then panic. Inside the house, only one lamp remained on in the kitchen. The rest of the room sat dark and silent around him. Claire's expensive furniture still filled the home, but it no longer felt luxurious, just staged, like a showroom after closing hours. Gavin held the phone loosely in one hand, while cold wind moved through cedar branches overhead. Voicemail notification. Again. Claire. He pressed play. Her voice arrived quieter than before. No performance left now. Gavin? A long pause followed. I don't know what to do anymore. Rain tapped softly against patio railings. You were right about the records. Another pause. Longer this time. I should have stopped a long time ago. Gavin listened without moving. Not because he wanted emotional closure, because details still mattered. People often told the truth accidentally when exhaustion finally outweighed strategy. Claire continued speaking slowly. They froze 3 more accounts today. Her breathing sounded uneven. Benjamin says federal investigators are expanding everything connected to Harbor Crest. A sharp inhale. I can't even access payroll systems now. The voice he heard barely resembled the woman from the courthouse days earlier. No sharp edges, no superiority, only collapse. Then finally, please, call me back. The message ended quietly. Gavin locked the screen without deleting it. He saved every voicemail now, every text, every call record, not out of revenge, procedure. At 9:42 p.m., Rebecca Sloan arrived carrying another box of documents from her office downtown. She stepped onto the patio beside Gavin and immediately noticed the expression on his face. She called again, 74 times. Rebecca gave a low whistle. That's not communication anymore. No, it's desperation. Gavin nodded once. Rebecca leaned against the patio railing while rain drifted through the yard beyond them. She's losing control faster than I expected. What happened today? Rebecca opened the document box carefully. Federal investigators executed additional preservation orders on Harbor Crest and 2 secondary vendor networks. That meant the investigation widened beyond Claire herself now. Exactly what she feared from the beginning. Rebecca handed Gavin several printed notices. Asset freeze confirmations, commercial access restrictions, subpoena expansions, then one page clipped separately. Gavin scanned it silently. Application for formal fraud review escalation. His eyes stopped on one line specifically. Potential criminal conspiracy examination. Rebecca watched him carefully. That language changes things. Yes. Benjamin Keene knows it too. Gavin folded the paper neatly. Did Claire cooperate? Rebecca almost laughed. She tried. She spent 4 hours arguing context. Context again. Always context. As if enough explanations could somehow soften forged signatures and offshore transfers. Rebecca crossed her arms. The problem is evidence doesn't care about context when numbers stop matching. Gavin looked out into the rain again. No, it doesn't. At 10:18 p.m., another voicemail arrived. Claire again. This one shorter. Gavin, they're saying criminal charges now. Fear sat openly in every word. They think I deleted files after preservation notices. A shaky breath. I wasn't trying to obstruct anything. Gavin listened silently. I just panicked. That part at least sounded honest. Not innocent, honest. People destroyed things when pressure overwhelmed them. Claire spent years controlling outcomes through movement and confidence. Now both failed simultaneously. The system she manipulated no longer responded to presentation, only records. At 10:41 p.m., Rebecca received a call from Miles Benton. She stepped inside the kitchen to answer privately, while Gavin remained outside beneath the covered patio. Rain softened into mist now. The yard lights reflected dimly across wet stone walkways. Claire once insisted cost less than the neighbors probably spent. Everything around him suddenly felt strangely temporary. The expensive house, the staged perfection, the illusion of power Claire built around herself, all of it weaker than paperwork stored in cardboard boxes inside a downtown law office. Rebecca returned several minutes later. Federal agents are moving tonight. Gavin looked at her carefully. On Claire. Yes. Arrest? Not yet. Rebecca handed him another page. Search, authorization, execution. Gavin scanned the document once. Condo unit, electronic devices, business records, cloud storage access. Everything widening exactly the way systems widened once enough evidence aligned. They're moving faster now, Gavin said quietly, because the obstruction concern accelerated review. Rebecca hesitated briefly before adding, also because Dana Holloway's files matched bank metadata almost perfectly. Independent confirmation. That mattered enormously. Gavin sat slowly at the patio table while rain whispered across the roof overhead. For several moments, neither of them spoke. Then Rebecca finally asked the question she had avoided for days. How are you actually holding up? Gavin considered the answer honestly. Tired. Nothing else. He looked through the patio glass toward the dark interior of the house. For years he spent evenings there, believing silence could still preserve something already damaged beyond repair. No, he admitted quietly. There's something else. Rebecca waited. I keep thinking about how long she expected this to work. The statement lingered heavily between them. Not rage. Disappointment. Because fraud on that scale required sustained belief. Not one bad decision. Hundreds. Thousands. Layer after layer built over years. She underestimated you, Rebecca said softly. Gavin shook his head once. No. She misunderstood me. That difference mattered. Underestimating implied miscalculation. Misunderstanding implied blindness. Claire never saw Gavin clearly because quiet men rarely looked important beside louder people. At 11:27 p.m., Gavin's phone rang again. Claire, call 74. He stared at the screen for several seconds before finally answering. Neither spoke immediately. Then Claire's voice came through small and strained. They're outside. Gavin looked toward Rebecca slowly. Who federal agents? Rain struck harder against the patio roof again. Claire sounded like she was breathing too quickly. They came to the condo. Gavin closed his eyes briefly. Not satisfaction, just inevitability finally arriving. They have warrants. In the background, he heard muffled voices. Movement. Doors opening. Claire lowered her voice desperately. Gavin, please. He waited. You could still help explain some of this. Even now. Even standing inside the collapse. Still searching for rescue routes. What exactly would I explain? He asked quietly. That I didn't mean no. Silence. Then Claire finally broke. Not dramatically, not loudly. The sound came smaller than that, like pressure, finally cracking something hollow. I'm scared, she whispered. Gavin looked out across the dark yard. Years earlier, those words might have changed everything. Now, they simply arrived too late. I know, he answered softly. Another long silence followed. Then Claire asked the question she probably should have asked years ago. When did you stop trusting me? Gavin thought about the answer carefully. Not the first forged document. Not the first suspicious transfer. Not even the lies themselves. It happened earlier. The moment Claire started assuming he would never notice. The night you stopped seeing me, he said quietly. Claire cried once. A sharp, broken sound quickly smothered again. Then another voice interrupted faintly in the background. Ms. Powell, professional. Calm. Official. Claire inhaled shakily. I have to go. Gavin said nothing. The line disconnected a second later. Rain continued falling softly over the empty yard while the phone screen dimmed in his hand. No more ringing followed. No more voicemails. No more pressure. Just silence finally settling where panic used to live. Rebecca looked at him carefully across the patio table. You all right? Gavin stared out into the darkness beyond the property line, then answered with complete honesty. For the first time in a long while, he paused briefly. I think so. The legal fallout unfolded quietly at first. No dramatic headlines. No television crews outside the courthouse. Real investigations rarely looked cinematic in the beginning. They looked administrative. Frozen access notices, subpoenas, audit requests, silent phone calls between attorneys. By the second week, Harbor Crest Holdings, LLC, no longer functioned as an active business entity. Vendor contracts collapsed one by one. Commercial lenders suspended every pending project tied to Claire Powell's network. 2 luxury listings disappeared from the market after financing reviews triggered additional scrutiny. People who once waited weeks for Claire's appointments now avoided attaching their names to hers publicly. Portland's real estate world moved fast when risk appeared. At 5:40 a.m. Monday morning, Gavin Powell walked through the lower mechanical corridor at St. Anselm Medical Center, carrying the same dented metal lunchbox he had used for years. Nothing about him looked different. Same boots, same faded navy work jacket, same burnt gas station coffee inside the black thermos. But people noticed him differently now. Not because he changed, because information finally caught up. Luis Ramirez looked up from a tool cart near the ventilation room. You're internet famous now. Gavin frowned slightly. What Luis held up his phone. An Oregon Ledger article filled the screen. Financial investigation expands into Harbor Crest Holdings. No sensational language, no emotional accusations, just timelines. Vendor inconsistencies, commercial loan irregularities, document verification. The article mentioned Gavin only briefly. Maintenance supervisor at St. Anselm Medical Center, cooperating with investigators. That was enough. Luis lowered the phone slowly. You okay? Gavin checked pressure readings on a boiler valve before answering. I'm working. Luis stared at him for a second, then laughed softly. Man, you really are built different. Gavin didn't respond, because this still didn't feel like victory. Only stabilization. At 9:12 a.m., Rebecca Sloan called, while Gavin repaired a damaged circulation pump beneath the surgical wing. The Salem deal finalized. Gavin tightened one last bolt before standing upright. So it's done. Yes. How much? Rebecca paused briefly. After tax structure and development easements, just over $8.3 million. The number settled heavily into the silence between them. $8.3 million. From the land Claire called worthless. From the property she signed away smiling. Gavin leaned one shoulder against the concrete wall. When does it close? 48 hours. Rebecca sounded calmer than usual now. Not relieved. Certain. The funds will clear through protected holding first. After that, we start resolving legitimate liabilities. Legitimate. Important word. Because despite everything, Claire created real obligations still existed. Property debt, mortgage balances, medical expenses tied to Gavin's mother's treatment years earlier. Actual responsibilities, not fabricated ones. What about the Lake Oswego lien? Gavin asked. Rebecca answered immediately. Disputed under fraud attachment review. You likely walk clear. Likely. Another careful legal word. But enough. For the first time in years, Gavin could finally see the edges of an ending. At 12:27 p.m., he met Rebecca downtown near the federal courthouse. Portland finally showed sunlight for the first time in nearly 2 weeks. Water still glistened across sidewalks while cold wind moved through the city streets. Rebecca handed him updated case summaries over lunch at a quiet diner near Southwest Madison Street. Claire now faced formal fraud investigation review, potential wire fraud exposure, obstruction concerns, civil lender actions, and federal financial conspiracy examination. The stack of paperwork looked almost unreal spread across the table between coffee cups and untouched fries. Gavin studied the pages silently. No satisfaction crossed his face. Rebecca noticed. You don't seem surprised anymore. I'm not. She may lose everything. Gavin looked toward the diner window where pedestrians crossed against changing lights outside. She already did. Rebecca watched him carefully for several seconds. You still care about her? The statement wasn't a question. Gavin answered honestly. Not the way I used to. That difference mattered too. Caring no longer meant protecting someone from consequences. At 2:41 p.m., Gavin stopped by the Salem property alone before driving home. Heavy machinery already sat near the perimeter fencing. Survey crews moved through sections of land with digital equipment, while temporary development markers lined the gravel road entrances. Northwest Grid Development worked fast. Daniel Mercer greeted Gavin near the main access gate. We're beginning environmental prep early. Gavin nodded once. The industrial land looked different now. Not abandoned. Valuable. Potential changed how people viewed the same ground. Daniel glanced toward him. Your father held this property a long time, since 1987. He had good instincts. Gavin looked across the acreage quietly. His father probably never imagined battery storage infrastructure or clean energy expansion, but he understood location, rail access, utility corridors, practical value. Simple things often lasted longer than flashy ones. Daniel lowered his voice slightly. You know, most people would have sold this years ago. Claire tried convincing me. Daniel smiled faintly. Glad you didn't listen. So was Gavin. At 6:18 p.m., he returned to the Lake Oswego house one final time before closing preparations began. The property sat unnaturally still in evening light. No luxury cars, no catered events, no networking dinners, only silence. Inside, Gavin walked room to room slowly. Living room, kitchen, office. Every space still carried traces of Claire's life. But now the performance layer was gone. No movement meant illusion faded quickly. He stopped inside the home office where everything began unraveling. The shelves remained lined with luxury real estate awards. Top elite producer, platinum market leader, Pacific Northwest luxury circle, titles built on image, temporary things. Gavin opened the desk drawer one last time. Inside sat an old photograph nearly hidden beneath paperwork. He picked it up carefully. Him and Claire. 14 years earlier, before Harbor Crest, before forged signatures, before quiet became survival instead of personality. Claire smiled naturally in the picture. So did he. Gavin stared at it for several seconds, then placed it back inside the drawer. Not out of anger, out of acceptance. Some versions of people stopped existing long before anyone admitted it. His phone vibrated once. Unknown number. Benjamin Keene. Gavin answered calmly. Mr. Powell? Yes. Benjamin sounded exhausted. My client asked me to relay something. Gavin waited. She accepts the settlement terms entirely. Settlement terms no longer mattered much now. Still, the statement carried weight. Benjamin continued carefully. She also requested no further direct contact. Another silence settled. Then Gavin answered softly. That's probably best. Benjamin hesitated, then added one final thing before disconnecting. She said, "You were the only honest thing in her life." The line ended immediately afterward. Gavin stood alone in the dark office holding the silent phone. Outside, evening light faded across Lake Oswego. For several moments, he didn't move. Not because the words changed anything, because sometimes truth arrived too late to repair what mattered. At 4:58 a.m. the next morning, Gavin parked outside St. Anselm Medical Center before sunrise. The sky over Portland remained dark blue-gray while cold mist drifted through empty parking lots. He stepped out of the old Ford F-150 carrying the same lunchbox, same thermos, same work jacket. Inside the hospital, the overnight boiler report already waited for him near maintenance control. Luis Ramirez glanced up from the desk. "You know you don't have to keep working here now, right?" Gavin took the report calmly. "Yes, I do." Luis frowned. "Why?" Gavin looked down the long mechanical corridor stretching beneath the hospital. Pipes, electrical lines, ventilation systems, things built to keep people alive quietly, without applause. Then he answered, "Because this work still means something." And for the first time in years, Gavin Powell walked into the hospital feeling lighter than the money waiting in his accounts. Because the truth had finally stopped chasing him. Now it stood beside him instead. 3 months later, Gavin Powell moved into a small cedar-sided house near the Willamette River. Not a mansion, not a luxury property overlooking downtown Portland. Just a quiet 2-bedroom home outside Milwaukee with a gravel driveway, an old stone chimney, and enough distance from the city to hear water moving at night. The first thing he fixed was the porch light. The second was the kitchen sink faucet. Some habits stayed permanent no matter how much money entered a man's account. By then, most of Portland had already stopped talking about Claire Powell. That part surprised outsiders more than the investigation itself. People imagined scandals lasted forever. They didn't. Public attention moved quickly once newer disasters appeared. But systems remembered. Federal review continued quietly behind closed doors. Civil proceedings expanded through lenders and vendor claims. Harbor Crest Holdings officially dissolved under court supervision. Claire disappeared from public real estate circles entirely. No more advertisements, no more charity galas, no more magazine features, only legal filings and silence. Gavin rarely followed updates anymore. Not because he forgave everything, because constantly staring backward felt like another form of captivity. At 5:11 a.m. every weekday, he still drove to St. Anselm Medical Center in the same old Ford F-150. Luis Ramirez nearly lost his mind the first time he saw Gavin park beside maintenance after the Salem deal finalized. "You're actually still driving this thing." Gavin shut the truck door calmly. "It runs." Luis laughed. You could buy 6 new trucks before breakfast. Probably. So why don't you... Gavin looked at the faded steering wheel for a second, then shrugged once. This one already knows the roads. Luis shook his head slowly. You really are impossible. Maybe. Or maybe Gavin simply understood something wealthier people often forgot. Useful things mattered more than impressive ones. Inside the hospital, life continued exactly as before. Ventilation failures, broken pumps, overflow alarms. The emergency generator still rattled during storms near the West Wing. Patients still arrived frightened at 3 in the morning. And Gavin still fixed problems before most people noticed they existed. Only now some of the doctors greeted him differently. Not because they suddenly respected maintenance work more, because they finally realized the quiet man beneath the hospital carried more discipline than most executives they admired. One afternoon, the hospital administrator stopped Gavin near the service elevators. You know, she said carefully, there's an opening coming up in facilities operations management, higher salary, private office, corporate structure. Gavin thanked her politely, then declined. The administrator looked genuinely confused. Can I ask why? Gavin glanced down the long corridor where nurses moved quickly beneath fluorescent lights. I already know how to do work that matters. He meant it. At home near the river, life became simpler, cleaner. He cooked real meals again instead of microwaving leftovers after midnight. He started sleeping through the night without checking his phone every hour. The silence changed too. Before, silence inside the house felt heavy, like waiting for damage. Now it felt earned. One rainy Saturday morning, Gavin stood in the garage replacing rusted brake lines on the old Ford, while jazz played softly from a radio balanced near the toolbox. The garage smelled like motor oil and cedar wood. Peace sometimes arrived, disguised as ordinary moments. His phone buzzed once against the workbench. Dana Holloway. Gavin answered while tightening a bolt. How's the new job? Dana laughed softly. Less illegal than the last one. Rebecca Sloan helped place her with a mid-sized accounting firm in Eugene after the investigation widened. Quiet office, stable work, no shell companies. Dana sounded healthier now, less afraid. You saved me, you know, she said quietly. No. You did. Gavin wiped grease from his hands with a rag. You saved yourself when you kept copies. Silence followed briefly. Then Dana asked the question many people secretly wondered. Do you ever miss her? Gavin looked out through the open garage toward the river trees moving in cold wind. He answered honestly. I miss who I thought she was. That difference mattered. People often confused memory with reality. After the call ended, Gavin returned to the brake lines without another thought. At St. Anselm, an anonymous donation appeared 6 weeks later, establishing a maintenance scholarship fund for technical trade students entering hospital systems work. Nobody officially knew Gavin funded it, but Rebecca Sloan figured it out immediately after reading the donor paperwork. You could have put your name on it, she said over dinner one evening. Gavin cut into a steak slowly before answering. The scholarship matters more than the credit. Rebecca smiled faintly. You really mean that? Yes. She studied him across the restaurant table. You know, most people would have turned this into revenge. Gavin considered the statement carefully. Outside the restaurant windows, downtown Portland glowed beneath cold winter rain again. Cars moved slowly through reflections of traffic lights and neon signs. Finally, he answered, revenge still lets the other person control your direction. Rebecca raised an eyebrow slightly. So, what do you call what you did? Gavin took a sip of coffee before replying. Maintenance. Rebecca laughed harder than he had ever seen before. Not because the answer was funny, because it was accurate. Fix the leak, preserve the structure, remove the damage before collapse spreads. That was how Gavin approached everything, including survival. Weeks later, on a quiet Sunday morning, Gavin walked alone beside the Willamette River before sunrise. Fog drifted low across the water. Bare tree branches reflected against slow-moving currents, while pale orange light spread gradually over the horizon. Cold air filled his lungs sharply. No phone vibrating in his pocket. No lawyers waiting. No investigations closing in. Just water moving steadily south. Gavin stopped near the edge of the riverbank, with his hands inside his jacket pockets. For a long time, he simply stood there listening. The world sounded different without constant pressure behind it. Lighter. Cleaner. Behind him sat a modest house he actually liked. Ahead of him stretched a future nobody controlled through manipulation anymore. And somewhere far behind, all of it remained a woman who once believed silence meant weakness. She was wrong. Silence was where Gavin learned to observe. Patience was where he learned to survive. And truth, slow, methodical, undeniable truth, was what finally carried him out the other side. The morning sunlight touched the surface of the river gradually, gold spreading across dark water. Gavin watched it quietly. No anger left. No need to prove anything. Only peace settling carefully into the empty spaces where fear used to live. And this time when his phone stayed silent, he smiled. After everything that happened to Gavin Powell, the lesson was never really about money. It was about attention. Quiet people often see more than others realize. They notice patterns. They remember details. And when life becomes chaotic, patience and preparation matter far more than loud reactions ever will. Gavin never won because he screamed louder. He won because he stayed steady long enough for the truth to stand on its own. A lot of people watching this story probably know what it feels like to be underestimated. Maybe someone looked at your quietness and assumed weakness. Maybe you stayed calm while someone else controlled the room. But calm does not mean blind, and silence does not mean powerless. Sometimes the strongest thing a person can do is keep records, stay patient, and let reality expose itself over time. If you've ever been underestimated, or if you've ever stayed silent while preparing for the right moment, share your story in the comments below. I read more of them than you think. And if this story stayed with you, subscribe to the channel. Tomorrow's story is about a father everyone mocked at a family funeral until the will was finally opened.